Good evening. Welcome everyone to the Town of Arlington Redevelopment Board. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Tonight is March 17th, 2025. My name is Rachel Zemberry. I am the chair of the Redevelopment Board. Could the other members of the board please introduce themselves?
Steve Revelak.
Eugene Benson.
Shayna Corman Houston.
Ken Lowe.
And this evening we also have joining us the Director of the Department of Planning and Community Development, Claire Ricker. Thank you. Let's move into our first agenda item, which is the continued public hearing for docket number 3831, 1323 Massachusetts Avenue. This is continued from January 27th, 2025, and I will turn it over to Director Ricker.
Thank you very much. No updated materials were provided by the applicant in time to hold a hearing this evening. The staff and the office are working with the applicant to provide updated materials at a future meeting to be determined by the board.
Has the applicant been responsive to the requests to set a new meeting date or to acknowledge the required materials?
Yes, we were able to get in contact with the applicant on Friday and then again today, and he is very interested in providing updated materials. They just did not come in time to be heard at this meeting.
Great. Before we open it up to the board for any questions, do you have a proposed date for the board to move to continue the hearing?
Sure. So we are getting into town meeting time. I would propose May 5th, which will certainly coincide with at least one night of town meeting, but it is a hearing we could likely get done prior to the meeting.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from the board, starting with Steve?
None.
Jean?
None.
Shayna?
No.
Ken?
No.
Great. With that, is there a motion to continue docket number 3831 to May 5th?
So motion.
Second.
We'll take a vote, starting with Steve.
Yes.
Jean?
Yes.
Shayna?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. We will see the applicant on May 5th.
May 5th.
Yes, thank you very much. All right, let's move now to our second agenda item, which is the reopening of the public hearing for the warrant articles related to zoning for 2025 annual town meeting. We will hold, this is the third of 5 nights of hearings as published for a total of 20 warrant articles. Consistent with the past, the ARB will be hearing from article applicants and public wishing to speak on each of the articles as scheduled. There was a question before, so I'll clarify that we will take public comment after the presentation and board discussion of each article as they are shown in the agenda. Applicants will have between 5 and 7 minutes to present their article to the board. I will remind all of the applicants that the board has received materials in advance and has read all of the documents. So if you could please focus on highlights and anything that may not be in the presentation that was previously submitted, that would be helpful. Once the applicants have presented, the board will pose any questions to the applicants, followed by a period for open public comment. I'd like to note that the board will reserve final discussion and voting on each article until the last night of our hearings, which is April 7th. All right. So with that, we will open our hearing with our first article. I will also note that we have 3 hours allotted this evening for the public hearing. I would like, we have 6 articles, so I'd like to allot 30 minutes per article. We may not need all of that time for every article, but that is the time that we will target, and we will wrap up discussion within 30 minutes from starting each of the articles this evening. Let's start with our first article, which is Article 36, a zoning bylaw amendment related to no net loss of commercial space for local business. if I could thank you. We've had our first applicant move over to the microphone over here, and I will hand it over to you for a presentation. If you could please introduce yourself first, last name, and address, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Sure. My name is Kristen Anderson, and my address is 12 Upland Road West. I'm here tonight with Winnell Evans, who is also an Arlington resident. And before we start with the presentation, I just want to say to all of the believers in leprechauns and pots of gold at the end of the rainbow, I forgot what I was going to say.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
All right,
There you go.
Thank you. All right, sorry. So I run, and you have the presentation as
We
well.
do.
Okay.
And we can certainly page to any, if you'd like to have us move to any page during your presentation,
Sure.
just let us know.
Did my presentation, did the images get removed?
Oh. Looks like that's a possibility.
Oh,
Let me see if I can find it
All right, let's pause.
again. Open in the browser.
Give us 1 second.
Hold on. This was perfect when I left my office.
The ones we have do have all of the,
Yes, we've seen all of the images,
Yeah,
but we'll make sure
images.
that,
yeah, I want to make sure that whatever gets covered by ACMi includes those images as well, because we put a little bit of work into them. Huh, so weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, should I email it?
they-
Let's see.
It's weird.
there we go. All right.
Thank you.
So let's restart your time.
I'll just have to scroll.
All right.
Okay, so happy St. Patrick's Day.
It's a miracle.
St. Patrick's Day. Okay. My name is Kristen Anderson. I run a business in the Heights, and I can attest to the fact that there is simply not enough space in town for local business. In 2003, when my company had outgrown our space in Somerville, we wanted to move to Arlington, but we could not find adequate space. We ended up moving to Malden instead. And it would be more than a decade later before we could relocate to the Heights. Similarly, for almost 4 years now, Arlington Brewing Company has been unable to grow out of their basement. We should have more space for businesses in town, and we will need more space for businesses in the future. Next slide, please. No net loss of commercial space for local business zoning affects development of mixed-use buildings in the commercial zone. We can protect space for business on the ground floor by requiring 60% commercial use there, and we can encourage space for business use on the upper floors. Next slide, please. We care about local business because businesses are vital infrastructure to the town. Small businesses make Arlington a vibrant community worth living in. Local businesses provide amenities and necessities that help residents to stay local. Accessing our needs locally on foot or on bike leads to carbon reduction. Protecting and increasing space for local businesses helps us to meet our climate goals by creating a walkable environment where residents can meet most needs locally, reducing our dependence on cars. Next slide, please. 4% of land in town is currently zoned for business, but only a fraction of that land is actually used for business. Arlington has been losing space for businesses, and here is just one example. There used to be a business on the corner of Mill Street and Mass Ave. The land there is still zoned B2A major business, but when the land got redeveloped, the use changed to residential. The business there is now gone. Next slide, please. So how much space have we lost for businesses? We took the town's first zoning map and mapped the 1924 commercial and industrial zones to the town's 2024 assessor's data. Then we were able to calculate the area zoned for business at 7%. Next slide, please. 100 years later, parcels zoned for business total 147 acres, or 4% of the land area. Next slide, please. Here we show that only 3% of the town's land area is actually in use by businesses. There is a difference between what is zoned for business and space that is actually used for business. Next slide, please. Arlington is losing space for businesses. Redevelopment has led to the loss of space for local businesses because Arlington is not protecting space for business. By comparison, Cambridge has been experiencing smart growth with an almost 20% increase in commercial space in just a 10-year period. Next slide, please. Mixed-use redevelopment is leading to the continued decline in space for businesses. At the recently redeveloped Toria block at 882 Mass Ave, the town lost 71% of the original building space for business. Before the single-story commercial building was redeveloped as mixed use, it provided 5 storefronts with 4,458 square feet of commercial space. The new 4-story building offers only 1,300 square feet of commercial space. Next slide, please. Compared to neighboring municipalities, Arlington does not have many empty storefronts. There should be available space for businesses to move into anyway. Next slide, please. We pulled the basics for this bylaw amendment from the town's MBTA Communities Act bylaw. You'll remember that the professional urban planning company, UTIL, helped to design our MBTA Communities Act bylaw, and town meeting overwhelmingly voted to pass it. In mixed-use developments, the first floor must have space for a lobby to provide access to the upper floors, but we can require business use on the first floor and encourage upper floor business use. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Here we provide some examples of multiple floor commercial space in the surrounding communities. We provide an example for Watertown, Somerville. Winchester is in the process of planning for possible multi-floor business use. Medford and Arlington, hopefully we'll see the Arlington Brewing Company in 2 floors of commercial space at 15 Ryder Street. Next slide, please. Over the next century, we can expect dramatic changes. To ensure a sustainable future, Arlington needs smart growth with vibrant neighborhoods where residents can access essential jobs, services, and amenities within a 15-minute walk or bus ride. There is room for everyone in Arlington, but we must begin to protect space for local businesses. Please vote yes in favor of protecting space for local business. Please vote yes for Article 36, no net loss of commercial space for local business. Thank you.
Great. Yes.
Winnell Evans, Orchard Place.
Yeah, it should be able to pick both of you up.
Okay, good enough. I just want to emphasize the fact that this article aligns with many of the plans that the town has already developed, including our master plan, the Arlington Heights Neighborhood Action Plan, our various climate mitigation strategies that are underway. And even though it does not include the industrial districts, it echoes part of the economic analysis for the industrial districts, which says standards do not allow residential uses to be on the ground floor, only industrial or commercial uses. Relating the floor area of residential uses to the floor area of light industrial use prevents residential uses from supplanting the industrial uses, a common concern heard throughout the project. And I think that we've also heard that concern a lot when it comes to commercial development as well. So I think that this article is in line with a lot of what we are trying to do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So with that, we will turn it over to the board for any questions or initial feedback, starting with Steve.
So yes, one question initially. You mentioned the MBTA Communities Act. So the 60% requirement there is different. So it reads 60% of the ground floor area, which we have not adjudicated one of these, but I assume that to mean GFA. But you're proposing building footprint.
Yes.
Okay. So the rest of my questions I'd like to ask in the context of a test fit. Through Madam Chair, if Director Ricker could display the plan set I sent to her. I'm going to get up and walk over here.
Perfect.
I'll try to speak up so everyone can hear me. Can you go to slide 1? So this is the most recent mixed-use project that we permitted. It's 2 floors. It's in Arlington Heights at 1513 Mass Ave. It's got 5 residential units and 5 parking spaces and an office space. The folks who are building the building, they are moving into the office space, so this is actually represents a new business coming to Arlington. Could you slide 2, please? Yes, this slide 2. So this is existing conditions on the site. The company acquired 2 properties, one with a 2-family home, one with a single-family home. It's zone B1. It isn't a business district. There are no business uses on the site, either site currently. Slide 4. Now this is the upper story, and it basically represents a building footprint. So there are 4 apartments, condos. They're each 900 and something. They're 2 bedrooms. They're nice size, 900 and something square feet. But just for context, this is the envelope, and this is what we're talking about applying the 60% regulation to. So can we go back 1 slide to number 3, which is the floor plan for the ground floor. So roughly half of it is parking, and half of it is developed, is interior space. So we have 960 square feet of commercial and 970 square feet of an apartment. It's an accessible apartment in the building, and it's got a space available for a van. So in one of the exercises I did in looking at this was to sort of go through it. How would this happen? This does not comply with the proposed change to the bylaw. So I went through the exercise of how could we modify this to comply, and I would like to just get some feedback on whether this is kind of what you had in mind.
Okay.
So in terms of...
And what's the zoning of the parcel?
B1.
B1.
Right. So, and if you can't see, you should feel free to come up. So the commercial space is approximately a quarter of the building footprint, or half the first floor. So to get 60% coverage, we would knock off about 200 square feet from the accessible unit. And we'd have to extend this over, to cover the entire front. Maybe the, utility room over here can stay, but we'd lose 3 parking spaces and the accessible space. If you wanted to put the accessible space back, you'd have to extend the parking area into the commercial space and then extend this a little more into the accessible unit, bringing it down to about 650 square feet. 1 parking space, 1 accessible space. The applicants would have to request a transportation demand management plan and a 60% parking reduction. So is this sort of the outcome that you were hoping to achieve?
Do you want to take it?
I think that's impossible to answer because this is going to be like everything that comes, before the board. I think it's going to be a project by project basis. I understand what you're saying, but I think that we were picturing more 4-story buildings where there would be greater opportunity for residential rather than a smaller 2-story project like this.
Right. And we're also looking at this through the lens of the future, where we have 3 business district plans that will be coming up at some point soon. So we're envisioning that this is part of that as well, and we're looking at larger buildings than 2-story buildings.
Yes, but the one thing I'm trying to get across is, there's a geometry puzzle, and in addition to, one of the things that typically goes on the ground floor of a mixed-use building is parking. And in this case, one configuration that accommodates the 60% requirement does require the removal of 60% of the parking. So another way of, another path to compliance would be simply, rather than extending the commercial space, would be to decrease the footprint of the building. So could you go back to slide 4? Yep. So that would mean basically removing these 2 apartments. The stairwell would stay. This one could go up a little bit, or out a little to the side, back one slide. And then the commercial space to meet 60, so we basically lose this. This parking that's enclosed would be open. It could be, they could reduce the number of spaces, they could keep the number of spaces, and we'd still lose about 200 square feet from the accessible dwelling unit. Is this something that you would have considered?
Again, with all respect, we're really thinking about larger projects. This is a little bit outside the scope of what we were both imagining with this.
Yeah, and just to point out.
It also seems like a bit of an outlier, to be honest.
Not, the parking in ground floor space is a constant. It is absolutely a constant. Now, just going back to the MBTA Communities Act, because that was based on 60% of the ground floor, you would still be able to keep the entire second story, and this would just extend a bit, leading to a smaller accessible unit, but for the most part, the building would be, pretty much the same. I think that answers my question. So, thank you for playing along.
So what is your suggestion then, Steve? If I'm allowed to ask, I don't know if.
No, you can certainly, do
What-
you have
what
a,
is-
do you have
what is your
a suggestion?
So my suggestion, and again, one of the, like to use the Toroya block as an example. When that block was originally constructed, it predates parking minimums. And if you have a building that's built out with no off-street parking, and then try to put something else on it that requires parking, particularly a residential use where it's really hard to get funding if you're providing less than one space per dwelling. Most banks, or at least our applicants, tell us that, to get funding, we need to provide every unit with its own parking space. My suggestion would be to go with the condition go with the wording that's in the multifamily district for 60% of the ground floor. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Nothing further.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Jean?
Yep, before I ask you questions, I just want to say, in general, for all of these, I think some of the roles that the redevelopment board has is not only looking at the policy, which we need to look at, but look at, are there any flaws in your proposed main motion that would make it ambiguous or difficult to implement, or that would conflict with other parts? So some of my comments on each of those. I'll start with Mr. Revelak, because I had the same project in mind that he did, and that it would have been impossible to get built under this proposal. Some of you know that I taught planning and land use law for about a decade, and a lot of that was about zoning. And one of the common themes throughout the whole thing is zoning in general is too, it handicaps too much unless you give flexibility when there are special permits to take specific situations into consideration. And what yours doesn't do, and I think, Winnell, you said it right, this is a one-off, but the next one's going to be a one-off. And two of them after that may be a one-off also. And the way to deal with that, I think, is to provide the ARB with some flexibility so that we're not locked in, and developers are not locked into these numbers, because I think the building would not have gotten built at all with this proposal. It's also different than MBTA communities in another really important way. In MBTA communities, they had a right to build the residential units, and if they wanted extra height, then they had to do something on the first floor, and it could require them to do, the 60%. This is different in that it will handicap or make it impossible for some people to build unless the ARB has some flexibility to change the rules depending on the circumstances. The other thing is, there are residential areas in the business zone. Some of them have been there for a long time. This would pretty much prevent any new ones from getting built. And maybe, because it doesn't just apply to mixed use, it applies to everything. And I wondered whether that was your intention, to apply it only to mixed use, or to apply it to any residential properties in the business district also.
Well, we actually did consider that, and I think it's an opportunity to increase the amount to bring more businesses into Arlington.
Okay. I won't say whether that's a good or bad idea. I just wanted to understand what you had to say about that. In part of this, it says at least 40% of the building footprint on the upper floors may be used for permitted non-residential purposes. What happens if it's 30% or 50%? I think one of the flaws with your proposal is at least 40% may be used. I think it just doesn't jive with what somebody may want to put there. I think it's a big flaw here that you would need to figure out what to do about. The other part that was a little hard to understand, and it probably needs to be fixed up, is the bullet. And we're not using bullets anymore, we're using numbers, so we're going to have to fix those. This area shall not include, and it's not clear what this area refers to, and whether those are in the 60% or out of the 60%. So it's another area that I think will just provide some confusion about how this would work. So if you want to go ahead, I think flexibility, because there are going to be a lot of unusual situations, and working on all the parts that I mentioned that are ambiguous, I think would be really helpful.
Thank you.
That's it.
Great, thank you. Shayna?
So, thank you for bringing this. I really appreciate it. I had similar comments to some of my colleagues, and so I'm not going to beat that horse any further. But just a few things I would highlight. Jean alluded to additions or work in currently residential properties, and that was also of concern to me. If you have a fully residential property and you're doing a large addition to it, this would I think require changing use of existing space in the addition, right? As opposed to simply making new space commercial, and so that might be burdensome. That might, I think, dissuade someone from making any changes to a residential property in the business district at all, which may or may not be the intent, but something to consider. This area bullet point that Jean flagged, some of those building management areas, I think are very typical to find on the ground floor, and so I would take another look at that. And then also in 5C, the way it's phrased, I think, may not achieve what you're trying to achieve. So if the goal is to keep it as you sort of laid it out in your presentation, I'd take a look at the wording, because I'm not sure that the wording achieves what you say in your presentation.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I agree. I think that I appreciate this article. I think that one of the things that we try to do, and to Steve's point around flexibility and some of the challenges with trying to fit all of the requirements of the program and our desire in the business districts to maximize the space that's devoted to the creation of new desirable business spaces in Arlington is trying to fit all of these together. It was interesting to hear you mention that you actually were looking at this for some of the larger developments, and I think again the fact that you took the wording from the MBTA Communities Massachusetts Mass Ave and Broadway neighborhood district, or Mass Ave and Broadway overlay district rather, makes me wonder if this would actually be simplified if you did identify this for buildings of a certain scale within this, because then you could get rid of all of these things that come into play when the buildings are under 4 stories. You also, I think if you're able to clarify, as Steve mentioned, the ground floor footprint versus the building footprint. To Steve's point, I think parking is where we do have quite a few cases recently where we have had to, in order to maximize the overall building footprint on the site, we've had to incorporate parking within some of the ground floor. I think that the last item where, I know that's exactly the wording from the overlay district. But again, to Shayna's point, if you are, where that was created to encourage and perhaps identify that as a potential use, but not require it, one of the questions, again, if your aim is no net loss for the full area, are you looking to require that versus the may? And so looking at that wording in terms of what your aim is, I think is important. And the other thing that I would just identify too is where you've been specific around, such as residence fitness facilities or common rooms. I think identifying amenity spaces or categorizing rather than giving specific examples always tends to work better in the zoning bylaw.
And that intent was to make sure that these were spaces available to the general public to use, not reserved
Understood.
for-
I think you were very clear. I would just be a little bit less prescriptive in defining what those are not. Okay.
Well, I pretty much agree with all my other board members here so far. I'm just address a couple more issues. One maybe that has to do with zoning, and the other is not really. But it goes to your desire to maintain or grow the business in Arlington. One, you might want to look at zoning changes or that can be done harmoniously with adjacent zoned neighborhoods. Because right now, you had shown that over the years, the housing or our zones are sort of encroached into the business area, and it's because of economics and so forth. But when that happens, it brings along zoning requirements. If you're abutting an R zone, your business zone is significantly hindered by that. So you might want to take a look at that and say, is there a way we can do it harmoniously where it can still maintain or encourage the business zone to maintain its business? I haven't really looked into every single spot, but I think that's something you should focus on besides just what you mentioned before about footprint and percentages and stuff like that. That could be something that could make a significant change. I've been working with some of the local businesses is trying to look what they're looking for in zoning changes, and the things they've told me about, like if I talk to an office person, they feel like there's not enough transportation for the workers. So there's only one real bus line that comes into Arlington, and there's only one area of town where there's MBTA, and that's Elway. So there's not to have business, there's not enough transportation to encourage that. That's something else you might want to partner up with to encourage that. Just not only one thing. If truly is the business, you have to look at the whole totality of everything there. Other things is when I talk to restaurants, they're talking about a lack of foot traffic, turnover in parking. So we might want to talk about adding meters onto the streets that are along Mass Ave, some of that encourage business. There might be, we might want to talk about increasing a little more density in housing along the area so there is more foot traffic to encourage businesses. Some other areas is some of the laws we have right now with drinking. You know, this town a while back when I first moved here, it was a dry town. It's loosened up a little bit, but still some of the rules are if you want to serve alcohol, you have to serve food. And if you want more than 2 drinks, you have to order food. And I know for a fact that a couple of beer tasting or whatever facilities said, hey, we can't meet that requirement.
I appreciate all this feedback. Do you have any other specific feedback on the article? Because I do want to make sure that we have time for public comment.
I'll leave it at that then.
Okay.
But I'm just saying there's more to look at just this one if you want to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. This is not meant to be like a master plan for how to increase business. It's just one specific zoning bylaw amendment.
Great, thank you. All right, so at this time, what I'd like to do is open public comment for anyone who might be looking to address the board related to this article. What I will do is provide up to 2 minutes for anyone who would like to speak this evening. Please let me know that you'd like to speak by raising your hand. Yep, sorry, thank you. If you could move over to the side here, we will have anyone who's looking to speak come over to the microphone over here. I will ask anyone who's looking to speak to please introduce yourself with your first, last name, and address. I will capture any questions you might have for the applicant. We won't necessarily engage in a back and forth dialogue with the applicant. So with that, I will open public comment, please.
I'm Laura Wiener. I live at 73 Jason Street. I'm not getting into the details of the article itself, but I have a different view for Mass Ave than one that kind of, I feel like this proposal freezes Mass Ave in time in a way. I think Mass Ave could be better. And what I would like to see would be 3 business districts that were really contained, and we plan for those business districts and then zone for those business districts for what we want. And then after that, plan and zone for the places in between. I think I would like to see the business districts the kind of place where you can park your car once and do all your errands and go out to eat and whatever else you might want to do. And I think we have the bones of that now, but all of the little retail in between, I don't think is helpful to us really having healthy, strong business districts. We're lucky we have 3 really, good business districts, and I'd like to see them get better. So I feel uncomfortable with us freezing things the way they are and saying every business district has to be this way and has to have businesses. I'd like to maintain the flexibility to look at them after we've zoned for the 3 business districts that are in our plan.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak this evening, please?
Thanks, Steve Moore, Piedmont Street. I understand what Mr. Revelak was doing in terms of offering a real world example of something that might not comport well with what's being proposed, but I would point out 2 things. First, I would say that the good people at Context and Verdant didn't design this to fit this requirement, so of course this plan looks pretty drastically out of line with what the warrant article language is proposing. I think if they were given a shot to try and work within limitations provided by this proposed article, this would look entirely different and perhaps and would fit the requirements that are being proposed, not as this clearly does not in a rather obvious way. Secondly, I would say, in all fairness to the proponents, that one of the options for parking is to have it be buried below ground level, not have it be on the first floor. Now, I know that's more expensive to build, but it is a good way to get it out of this problem area of the first floor, being wasted on parking spaces when it could perhaps work with the language of the article. Now, I know that that does make these projects less profitable for developers, but that's really not an issue for me. If it's less profitable and they still want to build in Arlington, they'll accept less profit. I know that that's an argument which is thrown up a lot, saying, well, if you put the parking underground, it's going to cost too much and we're not going to build there. And I really don't think there's a lot of data which supports that. Underground parking is one of the ways to go in this sort of situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak this evening? Please. Mr. Warden, yes.
Okay, I'm not used to microphones that come apart when you touch them.
These things are just so useful.
That's a real Aerosmith.
I hope this isn't coming out of my 2 minutes.
Oh, not at all.
All right.
Okay. All right, John Worden, 27 Jason Street. I just want, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Is it, okay. Well, I'm not going to wish you happy St. Patrick's Day or happy Evacuation Day, which is a public holiday in Suffolk County, but I did bring my Irish blackthorn stick along. When the mixed-use proposal was first made in town meeting, we had a concern that, some of us had a concern, that it would be an excuse for putting apartment buildings right out to the street and a token shop in the corner. And I said as much in the debate at town meeting, and town meeting member Chris Loretti had an amendment that would require a specified percentage of the mixed-use building to be commercial use, which is what it's supposed to be about. And we were assured, oh, no, you don't have to worry about that. Those ground floors will be full of all these thriving shops and wonderful things, and the people upstairs will run down to do whatever in the shops. Well, it didn't happen, as you know. And in fact, the token, one little spot for commercial and all the rest residential, and the apartment house right on the street has become the norm. And so I think this proposal is a way to get at that issue, and it seems to be a little more sophisticated than just saying, well, it should be 40% commercial or something like that, although that's another way to do it. But it's looking at the space as it now exists and saying, well, if you're going to do it, just don't cut that space down, as I understand the proposal. And I think that's eminently reasonable because we've seen it. The Carrera block is a perfect example of it, and I'm sure there are others, including that big one down in Lake Street and Mass Avenue in the Capital
Thank you.
Square District.
Thank you. You're at time. I'll take one more comment this evening in the back. Thank you.
My name is Ratnakar Velanki. I live at 21 Adams Street. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to the proponents for bringing this. I think it's a noble idea to encourage more businesses in the town. But having said that, I don't believe this is the right way to do that. Data shows that if you look at Arlington's data, business establishments, as well as population, as well as just the general national economic situation, the number of businesses in Arlington have strong correlation with the population of the town. The population of the town has decreased from 1970 by 15%, and hence the business establishments have mirrored that. So I think the best way to encourage businesses would be to encourage more housing, which gets us back to the 1970s level of population, and that would encourage more businesses. There's only so much the businesses can support. There's only so many Dunkins that are possible in the town. There's only so many Starbucks that are possible in the town with the population base we have. So I think instead of placing more restrictions and forcing owners and dictating them to build or allocate a certain amount of space for businesses, we should give them the architectural freedom, we should give them the economic freedom, we should give them the creative freedom to decide what they want to do. And I think the existing bylaws to take care of that and encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. At this time, we will turn the discussion back to the redevelopment board. Just to start off our discussion, and again, we'll have about 5 minutes here to wrap up, and then we'll move on to the next article. The items that I had as feedback for the proponents of this article were to address whether this was specific for residential or mixed use, to provide flexibility for the board given the range of projects that come before it, to confirm the definition of building area versus ground floor area footprint. To consider restricting this to buildings that are 4 stories and greater, meaning that you can eliminate the exceptions, to perhaps be less prescriptive with the amenity spaces, and those are the notes I had. So, Steve, any additional comments for the proponents?
Yeah, I know the test fit was probably a lot, but as someone who has to kind of do that on a regular basis, I thought it would be it's a worthwhile exercise. I'd encourage you to get the plans for the Toroya development, the Toroya block redevelopment, and just play around with different, you don't have to get into, feet and inches, but just schematically where you could put things and how much space things take. But yeah, I agree that, Arlington has, of the places I've lived in Massachusetts, Arlington is the least amenity rich, and yeah, it would be nice to have more businesses in town. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean.
Yeah, I agree. I'll just add one thing. I think it was something that you said, Kristen. We're going to hopefully go to town meeting next year with the rezoning of the Mass Ave area along Arlington Heights, and also hopefully a rezoning of Mass Ave in East Arlington. And I think an alternative to putting this in this year is to get into those 2 processes and to use those 2 processes as a way to put these concepts into those rezonings. I think it would be a smarter way to do it than to do a blanket across the town, because we're like a year out from doing that sort of major rezoning. So I would like you to consider that as an alternative.
Thank you, Jean. Steve?
Or just one other suggestion, thing to consider. Instead of doing it by height, most of the mixed-use regulations vary by lot size. So you could also look at, and the larger lot size make it easier to deal with some of the geometric issues. So you might just consider it only on the over 20,000 square feet. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Shayna?
Nothing further.
Ken?
Just one thing. You said you want to encourage upper floor businesses. How do you plan to do that?
say that businesses, there could be business space used on the upper floors without requiring it, encouraging it without requiring it. So I'm using the word encourage, that they may exist there, to encourage it. basically.
Okay.
That's the same language we have in the MB.
Yeah, it's just,
Yeah.
it's loose encouragement, basically.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Much appreciated. All right, so that concludes our discussion of Article 36. We will now move into Article 37. So if I could please invite the proponent to the table. Article 36 is a proposed zoning bylaw amendment related to multifamily parking reduction. So I'll turn it over to you. You have between 5 and 7 minutes to address the board, and we can just give us a second, and we'll pull up the presentation you pre-submitted.
Thank you, Madam
All
Chair.
right, go ahead.
And thank you, members of the board. My name is Vincent Baudouin, and I live at 70 Silk Street. I'm here to present a proposed zoning bylaw amendment to provide an additional pathway for parking reduction in multifamily housing development. Next slide, please. The proposed main motion would allow for parking requirements to be reduced without a special permit for multifamily projects that incorporate transportation demand management strategies. Next slide, please. And next. And one more. So I propose 8 transportation demand management, or TDM, strategies. The first is proximity to public transit, with 2 levels, depending on whether it's proximity to a frequent bus line or proximity to a non-frequent bus stop. Next slide, additional bicycle parking above and beyond the requirements of the bylaw. Next slide, cargo bicycle parking. So that's for larger bicycles, and I add a set of requirements defining what that is in terms of width, length, and not needing to lift the bicycle, but being able to sort of roll it at grade. Next, electric bicycle charging, which would include charging points for not only bicycles, but scooters and other small electric vehicles. Next, subsidized transit passes. This is for developers or owners who choose to provide T-passes or an equivalent subsidy for residents of their development. Next, unbundling parking. So that's projects where the residents would have the option not to buy parking, and where parking, if it is provided, would be rented or owned separately from the housing unit. Next slide is off-site parking. So that would be projects that could demonstrate that residents have access to parking off the development site. It could be on another lot. It could be on the street if they can show that it is reliably available without significant restrictions. And finally, next slide, fee in lieu of parking, which provides an option to reduce the parking requirement by up to 25%. So not the full reduction, but a portion of the reduction, by paying a fee in lieu of providing parking spaces. That fee would go to a sustainable transportation fund that would be used to enhance transportation alternatives, essentially to offset the transportation needs that are not being met by car parking. And next slide just covers project review and scoring. Projects or their developers would need to submit a compliance form, and the application would be reviewed, and if it meets the requirements, approved administratively. Next slide, please. So I'll come back to a few examples. I just wanted to say briefly why this is important. The goal of this article is to add flexibility to a set of parking mandates that are holding us back in our efforts to reduce our impact towards climate change and to support affordable housing, among many other things. Next slide, please. Our current parking requirements are part of a cycle, sort of a vicious cycle, where we are subsidizing car ownership and subsidizing driving. The theory of parking mandates was always to, if we increased the supply of parking enough, we would meet demand. But unfortunately, demand is not static. If you increase supply, then people buy more cars, they drive more, and we get stuck in a cycle where we can't support public transit, we can't support other modes of transportation. Next slide, please. This wouldn't be a problem, except that car dependence is very costly to society, whether you measure it in greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, wasted time, or I think most clearly, in light of the recent crashes in town, is the cost to human life in terms of injuries and death. Next slide, please. Then there's also a literal dollar cost to parking. When you require parking in residential buildings, that cost is bundled into your mortgage or into your rent. And so everyone pays for parking, whether or not they actually need a car. 1 in 10 households in Arlington does not own a car. Those tend to be the lower income households. And yet we are still decreeing that they must pay for a parking space associated with their housing. Next slide, please. So the idea of this article is to add flexibility to our requirements, while still acknowledging that we have areas of town that are car dependent much more than others. So it's enabling car light development in the parts of town where it's appropriate. Next slide, please. Just if you look at it at a national level, the red dots on this map are cities and towns nationwide that have eliminated parking mandates entirely, and our neighbors in Somerville and Cambridge are examples, and Boston is considering something similar. Next slide, please. I think Arlington merits a more measured approach. We do not have the full access to transit that Somerville and Cambridge do. If you look at the orange area on this map, that's a quarter-mile distance from our one frequent bus line, and the yellow areas on the map are a quarter-mile distance from any bus line. Next slide, please. In a similar way, our town does not have even levels of walkability. The green areas on this map, which is a walk score map, show areas that are relatively walkable, and the red and white areas are areas that are relatively not walkable. Next slide. And just to summarize, this article is intending to fulfill one of the key recommendations of our master plan, which is to establish parking ratios that reflect actual need for parking, and to give consideration, I think this is the important part, consideration to use, location, and access to transit. So lastly, I'll just run through 3 examples, and I won't go into detail, but this article would apply to multifamily housing in the sense of housing that's 3 units or up. So a 3-family house that would normally be required to
We're at time there. So I think that the rest of the items are all in your presentation,
yes,
correct?
just the 3 examples.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure that we have enough time for discussion and any public comments. So with this, let's start with Ken this time for any questions or feedback.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to give my feelings on this. I think as of right, reduction is a little on the aggressive side. I think having maybe 25, maybe 50% is okay as of right. But then when you start getting higher numbers, I think you might still be able to have those, but with a special permit, so you can see what the mitigating circumstance is, or what you're doing about how you can prove why you can do that. I think your number scores are a little high. I wouldn't be as aggressive. I would probably require more to get what you want. And also, I wouldn't mind if you tie in your affordable units to parking reduction and do a little research on that. Because I know that when we talked about the affordable buildings, it used to be one parking space per unit, and you can find some proof that is the parking lot always full with the residents, or is it half empty, or what? give some substantial concepts of it so people can say, hey, we have two buildings here in Arlington that's 100% affordable, and they only use half the parking spots. That would be a good measure. I don't know you're going to have enough time from now and when it goes in to go and do that. Talk to the management company, but I would encourage you to do so, just so people get an understanding of where this is, because it's a big lifestyle change. And some people will not want to give up cars just because that's the way they were brought up. So you're sort of forcing a way of living for some people. But if people are already living that way already, then it's not a problem. It's not as much a problem. That's what I see, okay? That's it.
Great. So just in concept, I think I provided this feedback when we first discussed this back in the fall or the winter. My concern is this is a complex, very prescriptive formula that is required. One of the things that the redevelopment board did this year is to propose a warrant article relating to reviewing the TDM options to provide more variety for the range of uses that we regularly see, which I think moves us in the right direction. My concern with allowing a more significant reduction, regardless of how complex the system is, as of right, is the fact that we still don't have overnight parking in this town. And I think that it's until we solve that issue, that trying to reduce the parking requirements even further are just a challenge that we've discussed as a board become really a challenge for us, especially in the residential projects. So,
may I briefly respond?
Sure.
We do have overnight parking in the town. The select board has established
we have a pilot program.
A pilot program, yes. Now, they've called it a pilot program, but they've stated, possibly in their joint meeting with the ARB, they've stated that they have no intention of ending the program. So to the extent that any program is permanent or not, it appears we do have some recourse for people who are looking for parking on the street.
So the pilot program, again, the redevelopment board made clear in that meeting, it's until there is a non-pilot version of that program, it's very challenging for us to make significant changes. Shana?
So I really appreciate this. I think this is working around a issue that as Rachel alludes to, we've all been thinking about a lot. It is very aggressive, and I think you yourself said that there are different needs for different parts of town, and I really appreciated that thoughtfulness, and I'm not sure it's entirely reflected in the text here. So that's something that you might want to think about a little bit, because it's clear that you've identified that challenge, but it doesn't quite come through. For me, when you got to the 75% reduction, I started to feel like that was very aggressive, particularly for certain parts of town. Just a few other thoughts, a few other specific thoughts. So we do have the TDM plan in 6.1.5, and you might want to consider bringing some sort of alignment with that, either language or order of items. You have, I know you have different items that you're considering here, but to the extent that there's overlap, you might want to look at that. Let's see. When you're talking about both cargo and electric bike parking, I would recommend that you clarify whether spaces are in addition to bike parking spaces or as a percentage of baseline bike parking spaces. The subsidized transit passes, I was concerned about this because it's for a time-limited period, right? And so the change, so the parking demand or lack thereof is not going to change, but the subsidized transit passes would, the way it's written, go away at some point. And so you might want to bring that into alignment. And then with off-street parking, as Rachel alluded to, we're not quite there yet in terms of the pilot program. And information about proximity requirements would also be useful should we reach that point. So,
Great, thank you. Jean?
Yep, thanks. I'll start with one thing that Shana raised. It's completely unclear to me how this interacts with 6.1.5, which allows the redevelopment board or the zoning board of appeals under the appropriate circumstances to use transportation demand management plans to reduce the actual amount of parking. This doesn't even reference it, and I can't figure out how those two things work together. If this were only in circumstances where somebody didn't have to go for a special permit, you would be carving out a little piece that right now doesn't exist in the zoning bylaw. But without figuring out what to do with 6.1.5, you've created an impossible situation to figure out. A few wording things before I get to other things. I was surprised cargo bicycle parking didn't include an electrical outlet as one of the requirements for that. When you say multifamily residential developments, our bylaw, zoning bylaw, defines either multifamily dwelling, which is 4 or more units, or multifamily housing, which is 3 or more. You don't say either, so it's unclear whether this refers to 3 or 4. Since you want it to 3, it should probably say for multifamily housing, not developments, just something like that. The MBTA doesn't refer to it as frequent bus routes, it refers to it as key bus routes. But more importantly, I'm not sure we want to tie zoning to the MBTA because next week it may change how it defines key bus routes or things like that. I'd rather tie it to frequency, amount of service, days of service, hours of service, things like that. I'm not sure why it's a straight line from the building entrance and not walking, so you don't have, it shouldn't be as the crow flies. Same concern with Shana about 12 months. But there's another interesting concern. Since this applies, as you've written it, not only to rental property, but also condos, you could have a 3-condo building where people are subsidizing their own parking or have to pay more for the parking, which I can't figure out how that would work. It just really doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm a condo owner. I put in $50 to subsidize my transit pass. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. also fee in lieu of parking. I don't understand how that reduces the amount of required parking. You know, you pay money and you reduce the parking, but it doesn't really do anything to reduce the demand for parking at that facility. It just sends some money over to the town for other purposes. Nice to give the town more money, but I can't see giving any points for something that doesn't reduce parking. On the first part, where people get proximity to public transit, 2 or 4 points, it doesn't say when it's 2 points and when it's 4 points, so you can't figure out how much points to give them for that. In the fee in lieu of parking, where it's managed, the fund is managed by both the town manager and the director of planning. You never want to have 2 different people in government manage the same fund. You either choose one or the other to manage it. Let me ask a question. Do you have any evidence to back up this point scheme that if you meet 3 or 4 of these things, we would get a 25% reduction in the number of parking spaces, but if we have 6 points, we get a 60% reduction? Are there any studies out there that show this point scheme and that it's not simply just overlapping, you know, between one and the other?
Overlapping in what sense, Gina? Sorry.
Well, in the sense of, all right, I'll tell this little story I used to tell. It's not about this, but it's exactly about this. You know, many of you know that they say in the heat of the summer, a tall, mature tree can actually reduce the temperature around it by about 5 degrees and reduce the humidity. Great, right? That's why we love trees. I have 10 tall, mature trees in my backyard. But the temperature's never 50 degrees in my backyard in the summer because it's not additive. And I'm afraid it's the same thing about this point score. It's not additive. As people do more things, as they provide cargo bike spaces and extra bike spaces and transit passes, they don't all add up. There's some limit, and I don't know what it is, but I don't think this is an additive sort of thing. And I'm just asking you, is there evidence that shows this is additive?
That's a great question, and I think we're trying to compare the value, and it's the same with our base parking requirements. You know, someone who's trying to build an apartment building, or they're trying to compare the value of adding an extra unit, but then that creates a need for an extra parking space. So that means they can't have, you know, something else, a larger amenity space, something nice that they would need. So when I was creating the table of points, which any table is somewhat arbitrary, what I tried to do was look at the different configurations, including a smaller building, a medium-sized, a larger building, and just see whether, you know, a small reduction could be reasonably achieved with a small measure. For example, for a 3-family, adding cargo bicycle parking, that might be enough to be a 25% reduction. And then could you, on the other hand, for a mid-sized or a larger building, achieve a larger reduction? Well, not unless you put in a substantial number of transportation demand management measures. But I will acknowledge that, like, it doesn't cover every situation, and that's just going back to Shana's point. I think that's one of the things I'm trying to do here is provide a fairly prescriptive pathway that is available and that is clear as clear as possible by right, without taking away the more special permit, the negotiated special permit pathway that's also available through the ARB for those other situations.
I think that's a reasonable way to approach it, except what I'm hearing is these points aren't necessarily going to reduce the amount of parking people will ask for. It's just a way for a developer to reduce the amount of parking. And I'll end with, you know, when we were having the most recent public hearing about Arlington Brewing, and the folks who who live across the street in the neighborhood on Ryder Street were talking about some of the issues with traffic and parking. They mentioned that after the building that opened behind it opened, that apartment building opened, that had less than one space per unit and that charged extra, all of a sudden there were more people who lived in that building who were parking their cars in their street. Either they weren't sure, either because there weren't enough parking spaces for them or because they didn't want to pay the differential to park there. So I'm really afraid that what you're setting up would do that again.
Thank you, Jean. Steve?
Okay,
Oh, one other thing, I'm sorry. You also didn't deal with with these reductions, what if there's a fractional piece? So for example, if you get a 75% reduction with 9 units, it's 2.25. Is that 2 or 3? If you get a 75% reduction with 7, it's 1.75. Is that 1 or 2? If you want to do something with this, you need to define which way that goes.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, there's, my understanding, the intent that I took away from the main motion is that basically, if this were adopted, an applicant would have 3 choices. One is provide the minimum number of parking spaces. The other one would be to go with what's in section 615, which, I mean, for all practical purposes, it is a point system. You know, it's a list of stuff, and you have to pick from the list or something up to the discretion of the special permit granting authority. And one of the things we've realized is that it can be difficult for smaller projects to do this. And maybe there's less reduction and a different weighting applied, which I do think that you've captured. One of the things that I actually I liked the idea of fee in lieu of. I think there may be a little more work to establish there probably needs to be a little more formality behind the Sustainable Transportation Fund, but I like having a source that could be used for things like pedestrian safety or speed tables or bike lane separation or that sort of thing. 2 last points. One is, although earlier I said a lot of our applicants, they claim that they can't get funding for less than 1 space per dwelling. That's smaller projects. But we can, sometimes it's not a universal. Some are willing to do that because this is a jigsaw puzzle and, you're having to move space around. And second, just, to just sort of a personal viewpoint, I haven't driven in over 20 years and I don't own a car. So to me, this is actually kind of cool. But I realize that, not everyone may necessarily have that same perspective. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we are running a bit behind on this one here. So what I'd like to do is open this up for public comment. We'll take up to 12 minutes of public comment, and then we will turn it back to the board. So at this time, anyone who'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Liz Reesberg, Shawnee Road. And I just want to say that in theory, I love the idea of fewer cars in Arlington. I love the idea of a more workable town, better air quality, and all of those things. But I think that this proposal is operating on the assumption that fewer spaces means fewer cars. And I think that we can't control the behavior of people, and I worry if we decrease parking on private property, we're going to have more demand for parking on the street. And if Arlington removes the overnight parking ban, there's no way to control how many cars people own in a particular dwelling. And I think we run the risk of duplicating the situation I lived in Brighton, where we had probably 2/3 more cars than we had legal parking spaces. I'm concerned now because during the daytime, We have streets that are clogged with cars parked on both sides, parked illegally all over the place. And I just really am concerned with, until we find some better solutions, just diminishing the number of spaces per unit on private property isn't going to get us necessarily to where we want to be with fewer cars in town. We see all the time that people have moved into Arlington, into East Arlington, knowing what the parking situations is and what the limitations are, and then they turn around and push for the removal of the overnight parking ban because they realize they don't have the parking that they need. So I think the situation is complicated, and I think if we move too hastily to reduce the amount of space, parking space on private property, we run a risk of a problem of as many cars, if not more cars, on the street, and some serious problems in town with managing traffic.
Thank you. Next speakers. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Carl Wagner of Edge Hill Road in Arlington. Thank you for the microphones. Big improvement for hearing us and hopefully for hearing what I want to say. I just wanted to point out that the ARB already has the ability to do this. And as was mentioned in board members' discussion of a past article earlier tonight, flexibility is very important. And it seems like this article takes away flexibility from the ARB to do the right thing in the situation. I also want to speak about two other points in addition to the flexibility that we already have with the ARB for doing this. Wishful thinking versus actual. If I could ask the slide 22 be shown again from the proponent's slide deck, please. The proponent has proposed that in a 3-unit building with very minor things done by the developer, 1 parking space for the people who have to live there would come in. Or in I believe, a 12-unit building, there would be something like 5 or 3 parking spaces that could easily be reduced by the developer. This is wishful thinking because the actual ownership of cars per unit in Arlington is well over 1. And as the proponent said, only something like 9% of Arlington units actually have no car. So those that have cars have many more than 1 car. And I bet that the 9% of Arlington units that don't have a car would like to have a car or need a car, more importantly. Even Cambridge, which is the least car-owning community in the state, has 0.87 cars per unit. So the actual nature of slide 22, it isn't there, but it says that the master plan calls for an actual need, not wishful thinking. And the proponent shows that in his slide. So I ask that you go with the ARB's existing control and flexibility of our actual needs, not wishful thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Next this evening, please. Yes.
Thank you. I won't touch the mic this time.
Okay.
John Worden, Jason Street. Just want to make really one point. To not have parking places because people won't have a car because they can depend on our so-called public transportation system is fantasy. I commuted into Boston for 57 years using our public transportation system. I could get into the city in under an hour in those days. But since then, they have, under the Healy regime, they have eviscerated our system. The only bus that gets you to Alewife, gets someone the whole length of town to Alewife, was arbitrarily discontinued. They're talking about moving the 67 bus to go to Belmont Center, everybody's favorite destination. The 77 bus, which used to come about every 8 or 10 minutes, now is 15 minutes if you're lucky. And if you happen to be in the afternoon when school gets out, forget it. The buses just go past the people because they're loaded with kids going home from school. And so anybody who has to get into Boston in a reasonable amount of time is not going to rely on the public transportation system because it just isn't there anymore. and the 77 bus, not only, I mean, double whammy. They don't let us get to Alewife. The 77, and they discontinued the trolleys to North Cambridge, so that the 77 bus has to serve all of Cambridge, all of Mass Avenue and Cambridge, from Harvard Square onwards, as well as Arlington. So it takes, it could take an hour and a quarter, a trip that used to take half an hour.
Thank you.
So,
Appreciate it. Yes.
Hello, my name is Tristan Boyd, 63 Bow Street. I'd like to speak more broadly in favor of options to have new developments have reduced parking for 2 points. One being my household, we have one car, we are a 2-person family, and we also share my car with my mother on certain weekdays as well. It's an arrangement that's worked out quite well for us over the last 2.5 years, and one we continue to look forward to continuing. And that this more broadly also gets to a kind of a lifestyle demand in Metro Boston that I've noticed, which is for car light or car free options. We're lucky to have 3 grocery stores and 2 drugstores in Arlington near the bike path that I regularly, take advantage of, and weather permitting, it is quite possible to do. I think this article is really getting at a much larger issue that will not be solved with one article, and does also rely on a number of state participants as well. But this is an excellent first step towards getting that done, and I think in some capacity, this should be supported. Thanks.
Thank you. One more, yes.
Kristen Anderson, 12 Upland Road West. I love the idea of incentivizing developers to include space for bicycles and other alternative types of transportations to automobiles. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, we will move back to the board for final thoughts. I will summarize the feedback that we heard from the board, and board members, please feel free to add to that. And then when we're finished with this article, what I'd like to do is address both the previous petitioner and this one, Article 37's petitioner as well as everyone who's to come this evening, just around next steps, so that we're clear about that as well. So the feedback was that without permanent on-street parking allowance in town, this is a challenge. The number scores do seem high. Was a question around the possibility of tying in affordable units to parking reduction. There was a question around how this aligned with TDM section 6.1.5 in the existing zoning bylaw. Question around the cargo and electric bikes, whether those were in addition to the bike parking spaces or a percentage. Some questions around the subsidized transit passes and their time dependence. Needing more definition around the definition of multifamily, whether it's a dwelling or housing. The discussion around perhaps alignment with the terminology key bus routes in MBTA communities. How does this work for condos? Questions around the measurement of the straight line from a building entrance and not the walking distance. And need for evidence to back up the point scheme. There were a few other specifics, which I know that Jean called out as well, but those were the larger items. Any other final points from the board, starting with Steve?
Yeah, where did Mr. Boyd, oh, there you are. While 615 does permit a 75% reduction, sort of one of the things that I heard among my colleagues was that, a sense that an as-of-right path might, I sense some hesitation at the 75%, and maybe you want to consider having the reductions less. But overall, I do think it is a well-thought-out proposal. But yes, I'll say, since we're running time.
Okay, thank you. Jean?
Wow, I have exactly the opposite thought. I don't think it's a well-thought-out proposal for the reasons that I said. I'll just add a couple of things. Right now, the zoning bylaw does allow a 10% reduction if there are affordable units in a place. We used to have a greater parking requirement, and we reduced it over the year, so it's now 1 per dwelling unit. It used to be more. A study that MAPC did a few years ago throughout the entire region found that the required parking was pretty close to 1 per unit. I think we're there. I think what we now have in the zoning bylaw gives us the flexibility to use transportation demand management plans. I think this, I just think this not only goes too far at 75% or 50%, I think there's really no support for the point system at all.
Thank you. Shayna?
I would come down, I think, halfway between Jean and Steve.
That always happens.
I do think that 75% reduction as of right is aggressive right now, but that this is, but that you have some strong elements in here, and I encourage you to refine a little bit, because this is an important issue, and with a little bit of work could be a very good warrant article.
Kim?
Same situation with Shannon. I would, right in between Steve and Jean. And I would suggest maybe getting some examples of something to back you up with what you're trying to propose here by asking some of the managers of different projects and support your idea here. But it's a little on the aggressive side, but the idea is good.
Thank you, Ken. And I'm in alignment with Jean's feedback. So anything else for warrant Article 37? Is it a clarification?
Just to say that
Because what I just wanted to let you know, what I will do next is to talk about process to get from here to the vote. So if that's your question, I just want to let you know I'm going to
It's
copy.
in line with process. Yeah,
Perfect.
just to say that the planning staff sent some very detailed comments this morning, which I obviously haven't had time to integrate into a proposal, but I appreciate that. Plus your comments tonight, I'm happy to kind of take a look and
Great.
work on all this.
Thank you. That's a great segue. So for both of our citizens who proposed warrant articles this evening and everyone who is presenting one after, I just wanted to speak about process. So we have one more night of hearings for additional articles, and then the redevelopment board will hold a final discussion and vote on all of the proposed warrant articles as to whether or not to recommend action, favorable action or no action in terms of moving these to town meetings. So in order to, if there are changes that you would like to propose to the board in light of the feedback that you received this evening, any modifications would need to be received by April 3rd, correct? Which is the Thursday before our hearing on April 7th. Actually, it would probably be the Wednesday that you would need it,
It's the
correct?
Wednesday
Claire, if you could
before.
just confirm. So April 2nd?
Sure. April 2nd by noon is our deadline for accepting materials to be placed on the agenda, which needs to be published the Thursday evening before the Monday meeting.
Great, thank you for that clarification. So April 2nd at noon for any modifications that you would like to propose to be considered in the redevelopment board's final review.
Question, would that include visual materials also?
If you have any modifications that you would like, there will not be another presentation, but the board often asks questions of the applicant, specifically if there are modifications in response to the specific feedback that was offered. Any other comments from the board on process? Great. And if you do have any questions, you're more than welcome, in the meantime, to address them to the Department of Planning and Community Development. And Steve?
Yeah, just in terms of process, what we will be deliberating on is the main motion, the actual text that's being changed in the bylaw. So if you're not planning on introducing graphics to the bylaw, you do not need to provide us with graphics.
Great. Thank you for the clarification. All right. So with that, let us move to our next agenda item, our next warrant article, public hearing, which is on Article 38, a zoning bylaw amendment related to use regulations for residential districts. And I see our proponent is here in front of us already.
Do I have 5 or 7 minutes?
Between 5 and 7.
Okay.
So you choose.
I'll keep track. Okay. Andrew Greenspan, 89 Palmer Street. This warrant article proposal. Next slide. Here's just the broader warrant language about amending definitions and district regulations on business uses in residential to just shape this. I don't have a particular agenda with this sort of warrant article, but it came out of several town meetings and various ARB meetings where people are legitimately bemoaning the lack of space parcels where businesses are allowed to be built. So that was sort of the idea here. Next slide. So this is, I'll just go through the proposed warrant language. This adds a definition for fitness and health club, which is only needed because of use tables. There's no actual definition in our bylaw, so it's there because of future uses. Next slide. Proposal is to adjust uses to allow personal service establishments in the current iteration, R0 through R7, laundry special permit, laundry, dry cleaning, tailoring special permit R4 to R7, fitness and health club, which I had to define, which we do have a lot in town, but it's not defined, R0 through R7. Next. Proposed restaurant less than 1,500 square feet allowed R3 through R7. Similarly, retail less than 1,500 square feet R3 through R7. Next slide. Business, professional, medical clinic office, which is basically office space and sort of medical office space, psychologists, etc. Less than 3,000 square feet allow in R0 through R7. And then physician clergy is also a definition, R2 through R7, but it already exists a special permit for R0 and R1. And next. And catering is currently allowed in R7, but allow people to just run their own catering in R0 through R7. And artistic creative production, which is defined in the bylaw, R0 through R7. So those are the current proposals. Next slide. Here's sort of the overview just of those proposals. Personal service establishment not currently allowed in R districts, neither is fitness health club. Restaurant currently allowed in R7 with special permit. Retail also basically R7 with special permit. Office use R4 through R7 but partly special permit. Artistic creative production not allowed in any R district, and catering only R7. Next. So off the bat, this doesn't change any dimensional rules, height limits, or setbacks for any R zones. It doesn't touch any of that at all. That would be the same. Next slide. So I'll go through the reasoning I thought for this amendment. One is lack of business space. The town needs more business space in commercial use. I've heard this time and again at town meeting and time and again from residents I've just talked to or walked down the street. From the town registry, as of December, there were only 8 vacant properties listed in the entire town. Next slide. Here's just, I went through the parcel database. Total business and industrial parcels is 714 in all of town. That's 4.6%. I think Kristen discussed this also for hers. And so of that 4.6%, only 1% are available. That's an incredibly low vacancy rate. Additionally, when you probe further, and I talked to the Chamber of Commerce executive folks, even those existing parcels and some other ones are old in disrepair, like they don't match for what businesses need to exist in town. Next slide. Another reason is equitable access and fairness. To promote equitable access, all residents in town should have an opportunity to access basic services within a smaller range of travel, especially those who cannot drive, children under 16, our families, certain people with disabilities. Some people with disabilities do need a car. I have relatives who can't use a car because of disability. And to promote fairness and more uniformity in our zoning code, we should allow certain business uses that already exist in B parcels that are already directly adjacent to residential homes, as I'll show in some of the map examples. Next slide. I'm pretty sure one of the goals in master plan or generally in the planning documents in Arlington is to make Arlington less car dependent and more walkable. Vince showed this in his presentation, but our walk score is shown here. The sort of middle there is more walkable to things, but a lot of town is not. And if you zoomed in more, you'd see some parts have some things you need, some do not, and that's due to partly a lack of business space in town. Next slide. In terms of fairness and uniformity, my view is commercial uses directly adjacent to residential. There are already commercial uses directly adjacent to residential property throughout town, including like restaurants next to single-family homes. One primary reason our zoning exists as it does now, and that we have this problem of getting more business space or anything in general, is when the zoning was created, you mapped the zoning onto what was there. So a single-family home was R1, a duplex R2. If there was a business, it was usually mapped to B, even if it was next to a single-family home, and that's just sort of where things were, but it wasn't necessarily a vision for a more coherent community with access to things. Next slide. The last reasoning I have here is town entrepreneurship. Most business establishments actually in Arlington are home occupations, but the existing bylaw there is incredibly limiting in what you can and can't do. Starting a business within a residence is significantly more affordable. The Small Business Administration says the startup costs there are, I think, $2,000 to $4,000, $5,000. The leases in town, I don't have it off the top of my head, but are much more expensive if you want to rent a business space, a current one. And with enough interest in starting smaller businesses that then maybe could move into larger space in town, you could help sustain and promote smaller businesses. So I'll just quickly, in the next slides, go through existing business near single-family homes just to show this isn't a weird thing. Next slide. So there's on Broadway, there's B2, B4, there are these businesses, bakeries, convenience stores, hair salons, animal hospitals directly abutting single-family homes. Next slide. This is actually around the corner from me, which, I would like more business near me, but there's a dance studio, a comic book shop, various other businesses. Next slide. Just another spot in town where we have business directly abutting single-family homes already. And next slide. Yeah, similar. Next slide. The last example I'll just give is where the narrow cases where we do allow a business in an R zone, some R6, R7. This is a dental office. This is sort of what I'm envisioning. It looks like a house. I walk by it all the time, but a business is allowed to operate there, which is great. So next slide to sum up. Yeah, there are existing business uses in R6 and R7 zones that have residential character, but people are allowed to operate a business. I kind of want to expand that somewhat narrowly, and I'm open to, honestly, suggestions from the board and feedback to improve it to let businesses succeed in Arlington. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Let's turn it over to the board members, and we'll start this time with Ken.
Well, I have a good suggestion for you, at least my suggestion for you, is I don't think this allowing it to happen in all residential areas is that appropriate, but I would encourage, if you were willing to accept this, is if a residential district abuts a business district, then that property that's touching the business district can be a business district, allowed to be a business, but still fall within the setback rules. So it acts as a good transition between business and residence. So it's not as grand as what you have here, but it's a little step back and acts as a transition. So yes, it's not a great big building, but it still fits within your setbacks of the residential area, but it's a business. And because I can't see a gym in the middle of a block of a residential area, okay? But if it's right on the edge of a business area, I think it's appropriate. I think that's what you're trying to do here, okay?
Yeah.
That's my biggest thing that I have for you,
I
okay?
just have a quick legal question on that, because I'm very open to that, and maybe Claire or someone on the board knows. If I put that, can I put that into residential uses if abutting a B zone? And if I do that, does one need to mail
Is
the
it a
thing
map
to
change? Yeah.
everything? Is it a map change or a use change? Because it's not a parcel, I'm not changing the parcel, I'm just changing the use.
I think,
If you're
Claire.
altering just the use table, then that's not a map change. If you are suggesting a different zone, or you are suggesting changing the zoning, that is a map change.
Thank you.
Just use.
that's why I would think you would use, on your use change, to put a footnote next to where it says yes, and then say when it's adjacent. That's the gist of it, okay? I'll let my other board members talk into more specifics. We're gonna kind of rush here.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure we take the time that's necessary for the article, but I appreciate, I think that was a really good piece of feedback, so thank you, Ken. Shayna?
Actually, I think Ken's idea is great, and I'm going to table my other comments because I think that was much better than anything else I was thinking of.
Jean?
Thanks, and thanks for bringing this to us. Let me start. I agree that it's not a map change. What I don't know the answer to is whether it would violate the 40A requirement on uniformity. Do you know if it would, Claire?
Off the top of my head, I do not.
Yeah, so it would be something to talk to the town council about.
The only other example I can think of is in the use table, there is like the width of the street for certain things, which
Right.
I think is allowed, so.
It would be worth talking to the
Yeah.
town council. The interesting thing about the definition of the fitness or health club, we do have something in the use tables now that I think is used for that, which are recreational facilities. And there are a lot of places in the use table in both the R zones and the B zones. So if we're going to do this, we have to figure out how to do this with the fact that we have recreational facilities already listed in the use tables in the zones. So it's worth thinking about. The personal, I'm just going to go down your, Andy, your main motion. So personal service establishments, you're allowing them in all of the residential zones as of right. So personal service establishments can include, but not limited to, barber shops, hair salons, nail salons, drop-off, pick-up, dry cleaning business, self-serve laundries, tailor, and shoe repair shops. Did you intend all of those to be, you could have like a large self-serve laundry with lots of machines? Did you intend to allow those to be in all of the residential districts?
One of those is special permitted out specifically, but
I think that's the line below, but I don't think it's specific to say, right.
well, I copied from the
line-
business
the
zone, so I
line-
thought I was copying how the business use table does it.
But the line above has Y for each personal service establishment.
Well-
And then it has a line underneath with some of the personal service establishments with 5 or more employees on the site, not clear, as you've written this, whether that means the ones above can't have 5. So you need to figure out what to do and then to clarify.
Can you explain to me how it works in the business zone? Because I literally just copied
I
it.
don't know how it works in the business
Well, then
zone
that was
because
the
I haven't
intention,
looked-
because
Well,
that's how it's written in the business
It's not
zone.
working. It's not working.
Then I'm not sure what
It's
the
not
business zone
working-
rules are.
It's not working here. In addition, one of the things you put in with hand laundry, there's no definition of hand laundry in the zoning bylaw. How do you define hand laundry?
So I'm a bit confused because I took what is defined in the bylaw for business. Are you saying we currently don't define what's allowed in business zones?
I'm saying there may be some defects in the business zones, but that doesn't mean you should carry them over into the residential zones. So there's no definition of hand laundry. I looked it up. Webster's or Merriam or something gives 2 different definitions. One is wash clothes by hand. but the other is laundromats. So I'm just saying it needs a little more definition. You also need to figure out whether this indent under personal service establishment modifies or doesn't modify the one above, because it's unclear. I agree with my colleague about having restaurants in residential districts, at least in the R3s, 4s, 5s. I will point out that, and I looked at this too, I think all of your examples are on the main streets like Mass Ave, Broadway. They're not on a lot of the
R3
side-
through R7, I looked at the
side
GIS
streets.
map, are almost all abutting, not
All-
but
pretty
they
much
almost all
abutting-
would satisfy Ken's thing, not entirely, but
Right,
they're
but
close.
they pretty much abut Mass Ave. So since most of this is R3 through 7, it's not going to help people walking to places because they're going to have to get to Mass Ave anyhow. Some of the other things like office uses doesn't seem to have any limit on the number of staff. Somebody could take over a house and turn it into an office and employ
Does the
20
current
people
business
there.
zone have a limit?
Nope.
Okay, I'm just saying,
I'm-
the business zones may need repair.
But business is different, right? That's the point. What might be allowable in business districts may not be as smart to allow in all of the residential districts. Again, catering services is another example where you have no limit on the number of people. So somebody could have 30 people working in a catering service next to somebody's house. Then artistic creative production, again, no limit on the number of people. Creation, production, manufacture, distribution, publishing, rehearsal, performance, broadcast, selling, teaching of the visual arts, performing arts, applied arts, blah, blah, packaging of parts for further assembly. Of course, that's going to be in the business district and the industrial district. I'm just asking you to take a look whether your intention would be to allow all of those things with an unlimited number of people in all of the residential districts. That's it.
Thank you, Jean. Steve?
So one question about one of the categories that you added, retail with less than 1,500 square foot. It sounds like you may be envisioning a corner store?
Yeah, corner store. I mean, I'll give an example here that I'm thinking of, which is different because Arlington doesn't have these types of spaces, but a lot of people are probably familiar with Bow Market, which has stalls that are smaller than that. I'm not even sure how small, and it has allowed tons of businesses to incubate in Somerville and then find bigger spaces either in Somerville or surrounding areas. So my thought is you incubate in small spaces that are cheaper, and hopefully you can grow your business and find a bigger space in town.
As in individual spaces in Bow Market are less than 1,500 square
Yeah,
feet.
they're super small. I don't 500 maybe?
Yeah, I mean, they're small, but Bow Market itself is big, and I just wanted to clarify that you were talking about Bow Market as a whole.
I think it is quite reasonable to have a small retail shop where you're starting, you can go on Etsy and see what people sell online, but you may want to try to sell, crafts or something.
And just out of curiosity, why not R0 through R2?
In retail. So a lot of this, I had discussions with Katie Luxai, the economic director, who did some research on this with me. So as I said, this is how it was drafted last week, so I was still working on it. So I am, again, open to, say, only R3 through R7 or something involving abutting businesses, something involving abutting existing business uses, as R3 through R7 are mostly along the main drag or within walking distance. I do personally think that we should allow certain types of small businesses more than we do. And I have examples that maybe were sent later regarding the difficulty of just running a speech pathology from your house, which I feel like you should be able to do. It's not a nuisance to people. You can't do that right now, really, having one or two people come to your house. So there are certain uses I think could be allowed in R0 through R2 for this sort of argument about equity and fairness. Jean's comments again are sort of there's a contradiction in that, so I'm willing to sort of narrow it in the goal of compromise to promoting businesses in some parcels, but I personally think some should be allowed in other places away from the main track.
All right, nothing further.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate your clarifications that you provided this evening because that helps kind of understand some of the goals. I agree with you that I think making it easier for someone to run a speech pathology business or a crafts person working singularly or, you know, perhaps with a business partner that would be great to be able to promote throughout a broader area of town. I think that the breadth of what's proposed across so many of the residential districts, there was a comment that I appreciate one of the members of the public who's joining us this evening made around making sure that we are not looking at this in a scattershot way. And I think that that's something we talked about the first time you came to the board as well, that there are probably nodes in town for which some of the broader items that you identified that are outside of the main business districts might be really interesting for us to look at. And whether that's through this or through a more targeted rezoning to create some of those neighborhood pockets of businesses is a really interesting concept. I think that for this, it's not necessarily appropriate on every side street. I share with Gene some of his questions. As I was reading this, I had a hard time getting to, is this a catering service of, 1 to 2 people or 30 people? There are a lot of things to his point because this was written mostly for the business district. It contemplates different sizes of these types of business. But if it was much more significantly narrowed to those very small home-based businesses, then I think I would have a different view of it than as it's proposed.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a couple kernels here that are good, but it's way too broad. I'll also read from the Mass General Laws on zoning. Any zoning ordinance or bylaw which divides towns into districts shall be uniform within the district for each class or kind of structures or uses permitted. So I think we do need some sort of reading from the town council on what he thinks, because there's probably innumerable court cases that are interpreting what that means. If I were interpreting it in a vacuum, I would say that you could not allow uses in R district just because it happens to be next to a B district, but I don't know what the court cases say about that.
Great, thank you, Jean. So at this time, what I'd like to do is open this up for public comment. We will come back and have a final discussion, some final thoughts from the board. So anyone who wishes to speak regarding Article 38, if you could please raise your hand. Please. Thank you. And as a reminder, everyone who wishes to speak will have up to 2 minutes, and please introduce yourself by your first, last name, and address.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Eileen Cahill, and 48 Dixon Ave in Arlington. And I just want to bring up, if it's very broad to consider the subsurface utilities, the way the town would have been designed would be what the usage of it is. So say for the sewer diameter, it would be designed based on a certain amount of flow on residential properties versus commercial usage. I don't know if it was if it's the statement in the town article is very broad. So I don't know if it's intricate of, what could be involved, but certainly you would have to look at the sewer if you're proposing like a restaurant. There'd be grease traps involved and things. And so that's something I just wanted to bring up to think about. But I don't know, the things that was listed in the proponents' didn't, certainly wasn't a restaurant. It was like a craft or something like that. So it's different, but I just wanted to, point that out, that it's a concern.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, in the back. Oh, sorry. Chris. Somebody's got to go. Okay. You will both have a turn.
Yes, Steve Moore, Piedmont Street. Just a couple comments on this. I'm pleased to hear the board speak to the fact that this is a very broad change. I'm somewhat surprised at the interest in using the use table to what strikes me as kind of end around a redo of a zoning map by adding what is a business use into, broadens significantly the residential use table. I guess I would, just the existence of a transition area between a business use and a residential use, the fact that those exist throughout town doesn't make it, is not a good justification to my mind of the use of it throughout an entire residential zone. And I think the board spoke some to this about sort of thinking about that transition area perhaps more imaginatively, but not throughout the residential, completely throughout a residential area. I would suggest also that the people who are living in these residential areas we're not expecting to have businesses of the types being mentioned here in perhaps next door to them, around them. I'm not sure that's what they bought into when they bought into those residential areas, because this broadens significantly what will now be business uses within residential zones. And finally, I guess I would ask the proponents, what makes them think that there is support for this in residential zones in the town? Why is it felt that there's significant support for this sort of, I don't know, vaguing up the zoning that we have in town this way?
Thank you. Kristen.
Kristen Anderson, 12 Upland Road West. I want to speak in favor of this generally, and also thank the board and especially Ken Lau for his insightful comments. I think that's a really great modification to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else this evening? All right, so we will move our discussion back to the board to summarize some of the feedback that was provided and see if there is any additional feedback for the applicant regarding next steps. And we'll start with Steve. Any additional feedback?
Yeah, so as I said for a different article, of the places that I've lived in Massachusetts, Arlington has the fewest commercial amenities, and I wish there were more of them. It was sort of interesting seeing the 1924 zoning map shown, because at that point in time, basically, there were business, what surrounded those business areas? Well, you had a train line running through it, and most of the things surrounding them were farms. And, they eventually got turned into business or residential areas, but, there was, in a sense that, the business district is really rooted around a community that used to have a lot of farms and a freight train. In terms of broadening, bringing more businesses in, there has to be space for them. And to answer, to sort of comment on one of the feedback is, yes, why do this through the use table without, rather than changing the map? There is a requirement in our map, in our bylaw, that says any map change, you have to send a certified letter to every abutter, and that's probably about $5 a piece. And, so this is why you see use table changes. it is the economics introduced by our bylaw, and it's also something that we have to deal with as well. But I think there's some refinements that my colleagues have suggested, but I think this is a good conversation to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Use table changes are changed all the time. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You don't have to do map changes. So this is certainly in line with how zoning is done. I'll just say, I mean, I agree with what Rachel said. I think there are some pieces in here where they can be small, limited number of people, home businesses, and occupations, but I think this paints much, much too broad a brush and allows too many potentially large, loud, concerning businesses in residential districts. I think there's a way for you to cut those back, Andy, if you're willing to go there.
Thank you, Jean. Did you want to provide any specifics or leave that up to Andy with regard to which of these that are currently in the table? And Andy, would that be helpful to you?
I would say, as I said, I'm super open to everything. My thought right now is depending on, I'll talk to town council about Ken's suggestion. R3 through R7 by itself without that is also essentially, or even R4 through R7, I think we only have maybe 6 R3 parcels, would allow more space for stuff and is basically adjacent to the main area. So that's another possibility. Then my thought would be specific narrow uses there, and then even narrower ones for R0 through R2, like this. I have a speech pathology example, but like specific small things that would be allowed that would be limited and capped in number of people. So if you want to send me things offline, I'm like open to a list. It's just our zoning code is so broad and messy, so I am open to anything, honestly.
Jean, did you have any response? Okay, Shana?
Andy, I think you've summed up what I was going to encourage you to do, so.
Thank you. Andy, I do appreciate that clarification. I think I would encourage you to really think about what the main goal of this is. Is it to encourage smaller businesses through a wider section of town, or to specifically allow some of these larger uses in those R3 to R7 districts? I think by focusing on what the main intent is, you may be able to come up with a more cohesive and a more cohesive proposal that I think has a specific focus that I think will better target the conversation and get to an outcome that would allow us to see a path forward. Personally, I'm looking at, for example, to give you more specific feedback, some specific limitations around artistic creative production and the last 3 uses under the office uses section, if you are looking at creating a broad number of uses across the art district. So that's just a piece of feedback that I wanted to provide to you.
Okay, sorry, one other technical question. Again, I took from the definitions broadly. If I want to take specific things from artistic creative production or from personal service establishment, can I just write those in if they're separately defined and say only those for the use table? Or do I have to add them as a separate definition in the definition table?
Yep, that's a great question. So one of the things, I think that you would, and Jean, let me know your thoughts on this too, that if you were to narrow the definition in the use table, that would be appropriate as opposed to broadening the use table from what is in the definition section.
Yeah,
Jean, would you agree
I
with
mean,
that?
so if personal service has 7 things in it, and you only want to allow 2, what you put in the use table is not personal service. You put in the use table just the 2 things that you would allow.
Okay, so it doesn't need its own separate definition in section 2. It can just be layman's term
Teller
stuff. Okay.
or, you know, if it has a definition, all the better. If it doesn't and it's commonly understood, great. If it's not commonly understood, like hand laundry, a little bit of a problem.
Great. Ken?
No, I think you guys covered most of it. So
Great.
I wish you continue and modify it as suggested.
Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. All right. And again, April 2nd, noon, perfect. The next article this evening is Article 4, Article 40, which is a zoning bylaw amendment related to two-family construction allowed by right in R0 and R1 residential zones. And I will turn it over to the proponent for 5 to 7 minutes of introduction.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for your time. My name is Dave Levy. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 18, and I live at 95 Radcliffe Street. So when we go to the next slide, we'll spend most of our time. I think this is a little different from the previous articles that you've heard this evening, only because we heard a actually identical article back in 2022. So maybe just some thoughts around that as we delve into my personal reflections on it, and I think others as well, and sort of why am I bringing this forward for your consideration this evening. So that article identified, if we think about 20,000 total units of housing in Arlington, there's roughly 9,000 either single detached or attached units in Arlington. 7,300 of those sit in R0 or R1 districts. And when this article is being contemplated back in 2022, staff from Department of Planning put together analysis identifying 700 of those units as under 1,500 square feet, so sort of ripe for a by right two-family possibility just because of their existing size. They also identified a larger footprint, inclusive of those 700, of 1,600 units under 1,850 square feet. So again, just a sort of an order of magnitude about what was the target universe for by right eligibility, just given the existing side and likelihood. I want to pause there because the theme of what I'm trying to do here is to say why I'm in favor of increased housing, because I do believe it'll lower the price overall. I don't actually believe this article on its own is going to do a whole lot. And it's important that I state that for the record in full transparency, because I don't think any one proposal is a silver bullet, quite honestly, in terms of the goals I'm trying to achieve or for the town. So in that, again, sort of thinking about, again, the total universe of possible, takeovers of single family to by right two family, we think about, we have 277 on average sales a year of total single family housing. We've seen 214, 213, 233 in the last couple of years, so slightly under. And then if we start bringing that back down to these others, we're looking at roughly 80 houses under 1,750 square feet a year turning over a year. And we're looking at less than that, 26 on average between 2022 and 2025, or 24 end of year, 26 on average, again, under 1,500 square feet. These are all just what I'm pulling from Zillow when I'm just filtering down on the statistics. And again, pairing that even more, we're looking at between 2010 and 2022, this is all from the staff memo, 27 permits a year for new single-family construction. We've seen that come down to about 20 per year between 2022 and 2024, 2021 to 2023. There were roughly 14 permits pulled in 2024. So again, overall point here is small. And I think sort of key points here that I'm trying to make are, when staff put together this analysis back in 2022, what I would argue is from the data is that not a lot has changed in terms of the behavior of the town, in terms of sales, permits, sort of active reconstruction that we've seen. So with that, I think that if this article were to pass, and it does require 2/3, you're not going to see sort of a ton of new activity in the town to dramatically change the footprint in the R0, R1 based on this analysis. Again, the major story of our housing stock has not changed as we're just simply out of usable land. A couple other points to consider in this in terms of what was then the data versus now is on the schools. Back in 2022, we did have less school enrollment in every single one of our, except for one, elementary schools, and that's further changed today. So we are actually 10% lower in our elementary school population today than we were back in 2019 at the peak. So what that's saying is you need considerably, the basic math would be to fill up those elementary schools. If, again, this were to pass, you need 80 houses to turn over that were single use. Each one of those would have to have no kids in them today, 2 kids showing up in the K through 5th grade, and all that to be done in 1 year for us to be back to 2019 levels in elementary schools. Last thing I'll make is traffic. I personally do think the traffic has gotten worse, in the last few years. I don't think there's any way to say it. I think certainly the incidents we've all seen on Park Ave are good data points on all of that. Again, given the number of changes that we expect to see, I don't think this is going to, dramatically increase traffic in the town. I will point out for the record that there's no change to parking in this proposed warrant article in front of you. So basic facts, and then with the time that I have left, which is about a minute, why am I sort of bringing this forward? And this article failed 113 to 112 back in 2022. So 50% of the town meeting members did vote for it. I was the 113th to vote no. And so what I can say plainly to everyone in the room is I have continued to struggle with how does the town change to make sure it's affordable for everyone. And I just don't see how, until we bring more housing to bear, that we can truly say we're solving that problem. I'm seeing too many instances of where just people that should be able to afford just are not able to. Now, where I think this will help, quite honestly, if we go to the slide with the photos, is right here. So this is a great example of what's going on in Precinct 18. Right here, you see a situation where an older, smaller, single detached house is being converted to a quite large house. This is exactly what we'll continue to see if this article does not pass. Smaller houses converting to larger houses. The only problem is the large houses are selling for roughly $2 million. So affordable for certain people for sure, but not for everyone. I think the benefit of this article will be that you'll see 2 houses instead of 1. They will not sell for anything that's AMI affordable, but they will sell for something that's much more close to the median house price in Arlington. And at least that on itself is a good thing, in my opinion. So I'll pause there, and thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you very much. So with that, I will turn it over to the board for feedback, starting with Ken.
Just going to recap real quick to make sure I'm clear on this. So you're changing R0, R1 to R2. All the setbacks that occur in R0, R1 remain. That's including parking.
Correct.
Okay. And the reason for this is to encourage more housing, so there'll be less of a demand. So it'd be less demand, so the prices for moderate rate housing may go down a little bit, or not continue going up.
Yeah. There's no silver bullet to what I'm proposing.
I'm just trying to.
But exactly, like no change of setbacks, no changes to parking, just possibly encourage slightly more housing in the hopes of moderating overall housing prices.
So the only thing that would change is just the population, the group of people that be in that property would change. You're saying it would not affect the school system because the school system is down, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to affect the sewer system right now that was designed in the 50s. So
Yeah, in full transparency, the school system will be affected by a number of ways, but I do believe based on population in the elementary school districts, again, I think we have, safe to say we have space for it. That being said, every kid is different with their own needs, so I don't want to prejudge or kind of make more larger statements than just that.
I don't see any issues with what you're trying to say here. The only thing I bring up is that people who have bought property that's single family did so for a reason. And now you're changing that. So I'm going to say that I would let the people decide that. And, because I'm on the fence on this right now. I'm trying to be upfront. And, but I do respect whoever bought single family houses deserve to remain that. And if they want to vote that way, I'm going to live by that, okay? If they say there's enough people here that says, no, I think I can live with the change, I'll be okay with that too. That's how I'm gonna leave it right now, okay?
Thank you, Ken. Question I have for you. Have you been able to find any studies of towns, not cities, who have started to allow duplexes, two-family houses and single, by eliminating the single-family housing only designation in their zoning? Any studies on effects or how that has either changed housing prices, population, et cetera? Has there been anything that you've been able to find on that?
Yeah, the one that I've found that's closest is Durham, North Carolina. Now, it is a city, not a town, much larger metroplex than Arlington. Obviously, it's part of the Research Triangle. Still putting together data. I think fair to say what I've heard anecdotally is that it is, again, like I'm saying transparently to you, it's not dramatically decreasing housing prices. Price per square foot, things of that metric are still relatively the same. It's only that, where there was one, there's now two. And so that effect is, seen with acceptance, hey, all right, I get it. More people can live on the same block. That kind of thing. But again, not a silver bullet on its own to decrease housing prices.
Thank you. And have you been able to do any outreach to the residents, especially those who currently live in a single family? Has that been something that you've had an opportunity to do for this year? I know that obviously it's been something that's been discussed in the past, but what's been your outreach strategy?
Yeah, sure. So all of my town warrant signatures are coming from people who currently live in single-family houses, both in Precinct 18 and nearby. So as a starting point, I think many residents feel that either when staring at the larger houses, and again, I don't, those houses paid for people to work. I mean, developers made money. It's all part of the economy, so no knock on it. But, to the point they say, oh, could something else have been built there? Maybe, and I think some of them candidly are struggling with how do the next generation, especially if they raise kids here, how do they come back, right? Because I think that's a big issue.
Sure. So it's mainly been within your precinct so far?
Yeah, but I am speaking with more groups starting tomorrow. I put out an article in Your Arlington as well. I've noticed every town meeting member last week. I would have candidly liked to do this sooner, just unfortunately.
Okay, no, that's fine. Just wanted to know. Shana?
So can you confirm this is identical to the language that was brought up last time, I guess 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
2022. As far as I know, yes, we've made no changes, and that's why the data I present, in that reference.
Yeah. And so if I understand you correctly, you're still working on talking to your fellow meeting members. And just to sort of follow Rachel's line of questioning, if you could sort of speak to your thoughts about why this might be a better environment this year than it was in 2002?
Yeah, no, great question. I don't think I'm alone in just observing maybe too many examples of people just wondering how they can afford to live in a town like Arlington. And and it's sort of, for me, you know, I just sort of say, all right, well, can we do something about it? And I think, you know, it's, you know, the reality is, you know, to afford the median house price in Arlington, there are a lot of jobs that you can't do to also be able to afford it. And I think that's just a fact. And well, again, I don't think this article is the silver bullet. I'd like to try, right? And I think, you know, those conversations, I think, are a lot of people are having. You know, certainly I've had many conversations with fellow town residents throughout the last 3 years. But it's also a national issue. You know, I think fair to say, you know, 3 million houses was proposed by then Vice President Harris as a platform. I mean, that wasn't pulled out of thin air. It's, you know, focus group after focus group in like kind of the political podcast world just talk about, well, what's your number one issue? Well, you know, the rent's too damn high, right? And so how do we get housing affordability more constant? But that being said, sorry, I know you got to move on.
No, I just, does that satisfy your?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, just want to
No, I
keep us
understand.
moving.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else, Shayna?
That's all.
Okay, Jean.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I have a couple of questions. One is, we've gotten some emails and comments that say, let's give the MBTA communities zoning a few more years and see what happens before we do this. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the MBTA zoning is a great set of solutions for this. I think what I would say is this introduces new optionality, both for existing homeowners who may want to think about something different, or for the next homeowner to develop that may be separate from what the MBTA zoning provides. And so it provides new options across the kind of price spectrum while still bringing overall median house prices, at least at this area, closer to the median. Also, I think just given the pace of permits that we would expect based on past, I'm not, you know, I think they can both work in tandem without interfering with each other, but it's a fair question.
I think if you go forward, it would be helpful for you to know how many units have been built under MBTA communities in town. Do you know how many 2 families and 3 families currently exist in the R1 district?
In the R1 district, I want to say it's roughly 180, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, it'd be nice if you knew exactly, and I think it was in the material that the planning department put together a couple of years ago, because, you know, when some people say, why should we allow 2 families in 1 family, there are places in the R1 district, like around the corner from my house, where there are 2-family houses right now that were built, I would guess, in the 1920s. Or even earlier, by the way. I'm just wondering about non-conforming lots that maybe don't have the required square footage or the required frontage, and whether there should be a carve-out so that for the non-conforming lots in the R0 and R1, you can't put in a 2-family. I wonder what you think about that. It would require some modification to the main motion to do that, of course.
So maybe just to kind of table stakes it, right now, they can develop a new house if they put in a environmental friendly foundation, among other kind of, you know, code conformities.
Or keep the same foundation.
Right. And what would be, how are you thinking about that?
Well, I'm just wondering, but right now, if they're a 1-family, they couldn't build a 2-family anyhow. So I'm just wondering whether it would make any sense for the limit on 2 families in the R0 and R1 to only be on conforming lots. I just leave that for you to think about. That's
Great. Thank you, Jean. Steve.
Last month, our Department of the State's Executive Office in Housing and Livable Communities released both a housing plan and a housing need assessment. Any chance that you have looked at those?
Not this time.
They're worth, but they're worth looking at, I believe. Sort of the bottom line goal or bottom line of the housing needs assessment is a projection that Massachusetts population will remain effectively flat over the next 10 years. They're actually estimating a decrease of about 0.4%. But despite the population remaining flat, the estimate is for a total of 220,000 new homes needed statewide over the next 10 years. And one of the reasons for that is we are currently seeing an exodus of people in the 25 to 45 age bracket. They can't afford it, and they are, the question of where do I live? It's sort of devolving into Texas and Florida, who have large in-migrations. And I mean, in terms of, Texas alone has probably demonstrated that building a lot of housing will make it less expensive. And the people who have apartment-backed REITs in the Austin area probably know this quite well.
Yeah.
I do, we were, well, I think we had, we sort of had, with MBTA communities, we had an expectation that, the change would be gradual. And in the years since the bylaw has been in effect, there have been one application. So to answer Mr. Benson's question, it is basically two dwellings turning into four. And I agree that it will be, probably a slow and gradual change. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Can I just add one comment?
Yes, brief.
Very brief. Several arguments have been made about, well, does this turn into 2 families and then 2 ADUs? And, I can't know the answer for every lot. What I can say is if you are maximizing the square footage of your existing footprint relative to your setbacks, the odds of then an additional ADU on top of that, I think mathematically would be small, right? So I think you're probably going to have optionality both for ADUs or 2 families. So it's options, it'll be either A or B, but not A and B. If you need an ADU in your garage, then that obviously limits your parking as well. So again, further hindrances to having both, probably more optionality than getting both things in place.
Great, thanks for the clarification. All right, so at this time, I'd like to open public comment on this warrant article, and we're going to hear from somebody who we have not heard from. So Andy, do you want to jump in first? And again, reminder, 2 minutes. Please state your first, last name, and address.
Andy Greenspan, 89 Palmer Street. When I moved here, I frankly didn't care whether I would have a single-family duplex or multifamily as long as it had what I needed for a growing family, which at the time was 3 bedrooms. I couldn't afford any single families in town. It was just not going to happen. I could only afford in a duplex or multifamily, and I have a unit in a duplex, and I love it, and I check Zillow regularly, and every new single family is $2 or even $3 million, and the duplexes at least are like affordable compared to existing housing. Lots of town has single family zoning, also interspersed with duplex zoning. In like East Arlington, for example, I walk around and frankly don't notice a change in character when I step across the street. I see neighbors and family and people I like to hang out with, whether you have 2 or 4 or 6 people on a lot. Regarding MBTA communities, I think only 1 permit has been granted so far. Maybe there are more, but 1 as far as I know, so that's, and it's just 4 units, so that's going at a very slow pace. I think Steve did a model before it was passed and showed that we would probably have that steady pace. I think this article will have a similar steady development pace to allow these just slightly more housing that we desperately need. An anecdote I will just point out about Boston and Massachusetts broadly. We are losing population to states that, as pointed out, are building like Texas and Florida. the 2030 census will redraw our congressional districts and the Electoral College, and we are going to lose our representation. Like, regardless of your politics, our representation in this country will be decreased because we are not building housing for people to live here. My last point is, I would request either way that the planning board recommend this just for action to bring to town meeting. I think, sort of as Ken said, we should let town meeting, the people, sort of decide how we want to go about this issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we will, in the green shirt, please.
My name is Carol Springer. I live at 29 Hawthorne Avenue up in the Heights. I have been a resident in Arlington for, 40 years. Yeah, 40 years. I lived in East Arlington for about 6 or 7 of those, and then I bought a house up in Arlington Heights. I loved East Arlington. I loved my 2-family. I had a great relationship with my landlord. It was a great environment. But I chose to move to a single-family housing area because I wanted to raise my family in a quieter, more family-oriented, in my opinion, area. I've done a lot of work and investment on my house, and the area has no spare room to be building on to have families. A lot of our houses were 1,500 square feet houses to start with. Now, there have been some people that have built huge houses and huge additions onto it, and they were allowed to by the town. But there's not a lot of space, and there's a lot of cars, and there's a lot of cut-through traffic, and I don't want that for my neighborhood. I didn't invest in this house so that I would have to have a lot more, even more population. Now, I totally get you when you say, where are we going to live? Nobody can afford houses here. I totally get that. My house was $200,000. Nobody can buy a house for $200,000. My kids are young adults, and they're like, Mom, we can't afford Arlington. You cannot tell me that building 2 families has resulted in lower-priced houses. There's a 2-family going up on Mount Vernon. It used to be a 1-family. Now it's a 2-family. I don't really know what all the issues around it are, but it's going to be listed for 1 point something each unit. There's not going to be any units below $1 million. And I understand that a lot of houses are going for, up in our area, like 1.3, 1.5, 1.7. But, 1.2 is not going to offer all these 24, 25, 28-year-olds a housing opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Yes.
Grant Cook, 16 Wollaston. First, I live at the edge of my district, so I live across the street from 2 families. I live just down from Little Scotland. And the idea that somehow this single-family zone is family-friendlier or nicer or kinder is malarkey. I have some great neighbors across the street. The fact that I have 2 families across from me up the street, it's part of the neighborhood. I don't buy that argument. You did bring up where's one difference in a few years ago, there was a size restriction placed on the bylaw that was brought forward of the 2 families. That's not here today. But, it's, you look at Arlington has changed. I mean, and there's a lot of people say, well, Arlington has changed for the bad way. But this zoning for 2 families, allowing them to be built in the R1 zones, is the way Arlington used to be. It's why we have so many 2 families up there now. So I kind of find it hard to believe that somehow going back to that destroys the town, if that's what enabled the town to grow to where it is today. So I support this. I look at, these will, whether that price of housing will come down, it may not go up as much. I mean, my home is, I do cringe when I hear people saying, well, these houses will be really expensive, when many of us already live in houses that are 1.3, 1.6. Even if it's a wash, there will be more housing for more people, and that by itself is a social good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Carl Wagner, Edgehill Road. I presented a slide deck in 2022 on this very thing, and I sent it to the board. I hope you get a chance to look at it. The interesting thing we found in 2022, we thought that most of the single families in the existing two-family zones that were converted into two families would result in higher prices, i.e. tear down a small house and make two expensive units. In 2022, we found that all the knockdowns, and there were over 50, they all resulted in higher price unit per housing prices. So the proponents' goal, over and over we heard, and all of us here, I'm sure, care about affordability, is some effect on affordability. I want to tell you that the reason the town meeting agreed with what I was trying to say, what we were trying to say in 2022, is that doing this does not help affordability in Arlington. It makes it worse, and it does other things. It gets rid of green space, it adds to traffic, it could increase taxes for the rest of us even. There are a lot of effects. And furthermore, as was alluded to, the voters have said they don't want this, and the town meeting has said they don't want this very recently in 2022. And since 2022, an important change has happened that lessens the need for this. ADUs by state law are now allowed wherever there's a zoned unit. I believe you could have 2 ADUs for double family zoning, and probably for this, as was mentioned. And you certainly can have an ADU in the backyard or the garage or wherever with a single family house today. So there's less need for it. And I want to point out something about Arlington today that's wonderful, why I think we all love it. It's a diverse set of housing stock. There's multifamily, there's 2 or 3 family, and then as someone just said, you can stay in town, keep your kids in town, not have to retire elsewhere by moving to single family or the other direction, whatever you want to call it. So we have 39% single family, 61% are 2-family and up. So we are a diverse housing stock. This change would inevitably get rid of our housing diversity, and it would not help our affordability. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will take 2 more comments, and then we're going to move on. Yes.
Thank you. Vincent Baudouin, 70 Silk Street. I do hope that we allow town meeting to have the opportunity to debate and vote on this article. I appreciate Mr. Levy's explanation of what led him to change his mind. I think that many folks in town over the past 3 years have noticed that things are not getting better in terms of house prices and affordability. I'll add another thing that some context with the MBTA communities plan, which I was part of the working group and worked with members of the board to develop that plan, and we chose to focus it on a particular zone in town where we felt like the multifamily housing would be an small incremental increase over what was already there, and we chose not to locate it in other areas of town where we felt like the kind of larger multifamily housing would have been disproportionate. But this proposal is a very good example of what would be an incremental step, an option for folks who have a large lot to add an extra unit of housing on that lot without in any way, as previous folks have spoken to, without in any way damaging the familial character of the neighborhood. So again, thank you, and I hope we will send this to town meeting.
Great, thank you very much. With the gray sweatshirt. Yes, thanks. This will be our last comment on this article.
Thank you. My name is Karen Gold, and I live at 18 Hawthorne Avenue. And I would just like to say that I think this is obviously a very complex issue. I support the idea of more affordable housing. What I do think is very important is that this considers not just the possible impact on housing prices, but also the impact on school populations. I am surprised to hear that apparently the population of school-age children has decreased since 2019, because that's exactly when my children were in school, and the schools were bursting at the seams. Even after the Gibbs School was created, Ottoson is extremely crowded. So I think we have to really consider if there's a lot of additional housing stock available in these neighborhoods where the schools are already very close to capacity or at capacity, that has to be taken into account, as well as, of course, the parking and car traffic.
Thank you. All right, so with that, we will turn it back over to the board for any final comments or feedback for the petitioner, and we'll start with Steve.
Yeah, in terms of, I do agree with Mr. Levy's assessment that, when you build a new building, the units are going to will likely cost more than ones in a 80-year-old building that it may be replacing. But the slide that happens to be on the screen is our status quo. So it's, you go from $1 million building to a $2.5 million building. And I see this as there's not a requirement to build a two-family. Someone can still elect to build a single family if they want to. But the option of having, a pair of $1.25 million versus a $2.5 million, I think is worthwhile to pursue. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. In my neighborhood, when older houses are torn down, the new house that takes its place is built to the maximum possible. So I think some people have said to us, if this goes forward, there'll be a loss of green space. But there's already that loss of green space with the McMansions, so I don't think this would increase the amount of lost green space because you're just taking the largest footprint you could, which they're building now, and splitting it into two. So I think the actual green space is going to remain the same because under this article, the setbacks, the FAR, all of those things are exactly the same. So, I'm sorry that the green space is getting lost in the neighborhood, but it's getting lost because people are tearing down smaller houses and putting up larger houses now because, if they don't do it here, they'll do it somewhere else. So that's how that works. That's all I want.
Thank you. Dana?
I would just echo what both Steve and Jean say. You can sort of, when a house goes on the market, you can identify, I think, just by looking at it, is this a house that is going to be reused in its current state, or is a developer going to come and tear it down for some other use? And a lot of the houses that go on the market, I think are just simply being torn down and rebuilt as something much larger. And so the question for the town is it appropriate? Is it appropriate if something much larger is going to be built to consider two families there or not? And I'd like to put that to town meeting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. My biggest concern is the outreach.
Oh, yeah.
I have to say. I think that the people who live in these neighborhoods need to know that this is being discussed, and that's going to be a concern of mine. Okay.
I would encourage you to do something what Steve did when we did MBTA communities, and just look at how many properties there are R0, R1, and then extrapolate the growth. So people understand from 0 to 5 years, there's potential of how many more units are added because of this change, and do it out to 10, 15, 20 years. I think Steve did a very good job at that. So there's an understanding of, we're not talking about 500 units. We're not talking about 2,000 units, We're talking about a growth of, I'm not sure what this is, okay, so I'm not going to give you a number, but if you can come up with some of that, it may ease some people's fears.
Just to build on that, I think being able to provide data and being able to answer some of the questions around around needs assessments and housing production in town, et cetera, is going to be very important if, in part of our discussion at our next meeting.
If not the town, I mean, when the town.
If it does, yeah, and especially if it does go forward to town meeting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
All right, our next article this evening is Article 43, which is a zoning bylaw amendment related to public shade trees. Let me know when you're ready, and I will turn it over to you.
I'm all set.
Perfect.
Hello, I'm Susan Stamps, 39 Grafton Street. This is a warrant article to just make some editorial changes to a wonderful bylaw that the planning department put forward in October of 2023 that required developers of large projects over 50, where they were enlarging the building footprint over 50% or doing new construction, that they would have to plant a street tree every 25 feet in front of the project. There were just a few changes that I noticed in some of the hearings involving that requirement for projects here, because I'm here on behalf of the tree committee when I come to the ARB meetings, and so I listen to what's happening with the trees. And so there were some changes that Green Streets Arlington, my group was interested in making here. All of them we have reviewed with the tree warden. He approves all of them. The first one is under 6.3.1 purpose, that slide there, is in C to change it, which says it's under purposes, address the heat island effects emanating from Arlington's main corridors. And we want to change that to emanating from Arlington streets and buildings to make clear that those are the sources of the heat, so that planning can be done in coordinating with that. And that also since main corridors are mentioned in A, this changing main corridors a second time to streets and buildings would make it clear that this is appropriate for projects all over town, because it would apply all over town. And the next slide, the second change would be to 6.3.4, and it's how trees are chosen to be planted by the developer. And it says that in B, there's the word approved that we're crossing out because we already used the word approved in the next line, so it's redundant. And then we added in that the tree warden would approve the choice of tree for each project. The reason being that the bylaw already requires that the developer consult a tree list prepared by the tree committee and approved by the tree warden. But for large street trees or any kind of tree, really, there are many, many choices in that tree list. And only the tree warden or a certified arborist is going to know for sure what is the right tree for the right place, our tree warden likes to say. So that's why we added in that, and it is a street tree, it's going to be a public tree. So that's why we added then that the tree warden would approve the choice. Also, in C, where it says that trees must be a minimum height of 10 inches or 10 feet or 2 inches in caliper, we felt that we could just remove the minimum height of 10 feet because that was an either or, like it's now written either or, that it would be a minimum height of 10 feet or 2 inches in caliper, when really what's needed is 2 inches in caliper. And because it could be a 10-foot high tree, and it could be just a little tiny skinny tree that's going to take a lot longer to grow. So we're recommending that that be crossed out, and that 2 inches in caliper remain. And also just clarifying that we're looking for large public shade trees, big street trees. So we've added trees must be able to reach 25 feet in height at maturity unless they're planted under utility wires. And again, this was approved by the tree warden. That's what's considered a large shade tree, is a tree that gets to be 25 feet at maturity. And next slide, please. And I think this is, no, there's a couple more changes. That I believe it was Marisa in the planning department asked me to to change the watering requirement, the 3-year maintenance requirement that is in this bylaw to the one that was put in the bylaw we passed last spring for planting trees in parking lots. It's the bylaw that is the USDA Forest Service Tree Owners Manual or other standards that the redevelopment board may designate. So we would ask that to be put in there. And the other item in D that we added was on the tree, a problem that we've had on the tree committee is that we require, is that when developers would plant trees, they'd then say goodbye, and the trees would die, and that would be the end of that. So we've noticed that tree bylaws in other towns are starting to require 3-year maintenance and watering. And so we put this in here that it already says that they'll be maintained for no less than 36 months, but we have a requirement that the owner of the property has to inspect the trees once a year to make sure, yep, they're still alive, still doing well, and that they will file a report of that, just a little, paragraph or sentence with the Department of Planning, so that we know that, in fact, this requirement has really been adhered to. And then finally, am I doing on time?
You have 30 seconds.
Okay. Okay, yes, and this is the last one, where right now, there is basically one option in E. Next slide, please. Is that, oh, no, whoops, go back, thank you. In section E, it says that if there's no if it can't be planted on the sidewalk or the tree strip, then the redevelopment board may require the developer to plant it somewhere on the property or otherwise pay into the tree fund. We put in 2 changes there that actually gives the developer 3 bites at the apple and the redevelopment board 3 bites at the apple to require a tree be planted. The first one is the tree strip in the sidewalk. The next one is, well, okay, if there's no room there, then they have to plant it on the property within 20 feet. If they can't do it there, then they have to plant it elsewhere. And then if that's just not feasible, they pay into the tree fund. So all of these are to just make sure that we can get as many trees planted in town.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take comment from the board, starting with Steve.
So I just, you answered one of my questions was why was the tree committee's list insufficient? And I think you answered that.
Yeah.
And have you spoken with town staff about the reporting requirements?
I think, I don't remember, to be honest with you.
And
I think I might have mentioned it to Marisa. I tried to make it very, very, do I think that anybody's going to, I shouldn't say this publicly, but sometimes, at least it's there, so hopefully they'll do it. I know the planning department has a lot to do. So sometimes these kinds of things are not necessarily, people don't do it, and, but they're kind of put on notice that somebody's watching.
And
whether they're not or whether they are or not.
Okay, and so I assume that, like in, yeah, never mind. Let me just back that up again. And when a resident, I understand, can request the town plant a street tree, are those subject to similar reporting requirements?
When it's planted by the town?
Yes.
By the tree department?
Yes.
Oh, no. We plant 150 trees a year, I think. That would take the tree wardens all of their time to, if they,
But I mean, usually it's
Yeah.
a person who requests it. Town staff comes and installs a tree in front of, a shade tree in front of someone's house. Does the person who requested the tree have a similar reporting requirement?
well, unfortunately, the residents do not have any kind of requirement to water the tree. We try to get them to water the tree. We have a robust Adopt a Tree program. Some people water their trees and some people don't. I don't really think we have the power to require our residents to water trees, although I'm sure the tree would love to.
My question was actually
Yeah.
reporting. Does the recipient of a town tree, of a tree planted by town staff, have to file a report periodically to say that the tree is healthy or the tree is not healthy?
No.
Okay, thank you. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you. Jean?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this forward, Susan. A few questions and suggestions. Under C, where you have tree must be able to reach 25 feet in height, should it say at least 25 feet? I just ask you that so you think about that. In D, including watering by the installer, but the installer's leaving, and the next two sentences down, it's the owner, so you may think it would be better including watering by the owner of the property rather than the installer, because the installer's leaving, right? They built the place and they're going or whatever. So think about whether that's a better way to do it than the owner. I'm really concerned about the reporting thing because people aren't going to do it and nobody's going to make them do it. And I just am very wary of putting something in the zoning bylaw that nobody's going to follow. My suggestion would be to take that reporting sentence out, and the tree committee could take a look each year and see what's going on. I just don't like the idea of a reporting requirement that nobody's going to do, that nobody's going to follow up on. On E, one of the things I liked about E before was it gave the redevelopment board some flexibility about location and things like that. You've taken away all the flexibility, and as I mentioned about one of the earlier, by changing shall to may, and as I mentioned, one of the earlier things, flexibility is important in implementing these things because things happen. So I don't like how you changed E because of that. And I would like to have that back. The other thing is when it's every 20 feet on the public right-of-way or, just inside, but when it's somewhere else on the property that no longer has any relationship to a shade tree within the right-of-way or close to the right-of-way. So I think that's going too far. So I'd like to see some changes to E. That's it.
Great, thank you, Jean. Gina?
Thanks, Susan, for bringing this forward. In C, where you have trees need to reach 25 feet in height, think about whether your changes to B with the tree warden approving choice of trees negates the necessity for this. Maybe it doesn't. Think about that. I'm also really concerned about the reporting requirements. As you say, people won't do it. The department doesn't really have the time to look at it. And I would echo Jean about E. I really liked the flexibility that was there before. It enabled us to get more trees planted by finding places for those trees when the street front was not accommodating, as it were. So I would encourage you to leave E as it is.
Great, thank you. I agree. I think, quite honestly, most of these changes, to echo some of the comments of my colleagues, I would not be in agreement with. I think in general, changing the standard, if that has been recommended by the Department of Planning and Community Development, that would be fine, but overall, I think the article's unnecessary. I'll give you specific comments on each. You did answer my question, if the tree board needs to approve the trees, are there inappropriate trees on the list? It doesn't make any sense to me if there's a list that's put forth, why the tree warden also, why they need to go through the process of the tree warden approving the choice. I would take out the line about the trees needing to be able to reach 25 feet in height at maturity. I'm assuming that the list has already been vetted for that reason and that is an unnecessary condition. I would also say that the redevelopment board is not going to set standards for tree planting and maintenance. So I would take out or other standards as that the redevelopment board may designate. That's not something the board is going to weigh in on. I would remove the reporting. Again, it's an overburdening of the Department of Planning and Community Development, and I don't think anyone's going to look at that, or they need to do it. And I would take out all the changes to E, because I think, as the others have stated, that we regularly utilize the flexibility that's currently in there now.
Can I thought that I was asked to change that standard, the
I
maintenance
said
standard.
If you were asked to change to the USDA, I said that's the only change in here that I see necessity for.
Thank you.
Yes. Good.
Yeah, under 6.3.2, applicability, it says, in business, residential, and multifamily overlay district, are we talking about just what is the scope of this when it's required? What's your intention?
That's not changing.
That's not touched.
That's not touched?
No.
'Cause
The only thing on that, there's nothing in 6.3.2 that's being changed.
Okay, then we'll talk about that later, because that's something that I want to change. But the other thing is, this thing seems silent when it comes to solar. If these street trees interfere with solar of neighboring houses, the houses, whatever, how do you address that? How's that going to be dealt with?
I think that's.
I think that's out of scope for what the warrant article. This is specific to the likelihood of survival of street trees.
No, it has to do with survival, unless the guys who own the solar panel cut them down because they're blocking their sun.
Well, I mean, that's.
But no. Okay, then I'm on fire. I'm set.
Okay, anything else? All right, so let's open this up to the public for comment. Anyone with any comments on Article 43? Yes.
Hi, Alan Jones, 1 Lehigh Street, and this is a response to the reporting issue. If there's a requirement for the developer, more likely a hired contractor like ArborCare or something, to maintain the tree and water the tree, could the reporting requirement be put on that party rather than the resident? Seems like that would do two things. One, it would maybe monitor the quality of the tree, but would also sort of say, oh yeah, they did water it, sort of like a time clock. Anyway, I'm just making that as a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on Article 43? All right, at this time, we'll turn it back to the board for discussion, starting with Steve. Any additional points?
Yeah, I think that for me, the difficult one is the reporting requirement. When I'm conscious of, trying to make things apply equally. And to, like, in the case here, a builder or technically a property owner is paying for the tree. Maybe the cost was passed through a builder or a developer, but having requiring someone to report on the health of their own tree where when the town plants one, the recipient did not pay for it, but there is no reporting requirement. To me, that seems uneven-handed.
Great, thank you. Jean?
I have nothing to add.
Shayna?
I also have nothing to add.
No, I have nothing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And again, any modifications that you'd like to make, if you could send those by noon on April 2nd.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much. Great, so we will move to our last article this evening, which is Article 44, a zoning bylaw amendment related to affordable housing overlay. And we will turn it over to the petitioner.
Thank you. John Worden, Jason Street, again. This article addresses something that, well, let me back up a minute. In the master plan, the previous master plan is still in effect until the new one comes out. They said the only additional housing Arlington needs is affordable housing and senior housing. Well, we've done 0 in the senior housing department, and we've done a trace amount in the affordable housing department. This article addresses the affordable housing aspect, and the other, and I would also add that Arlington, we talk about the need for more housing. I would say we don't need to have it all here in Arlington. We are already the 11th densest community in the whole state. You know, we're number 11 out of 351. We are the second densest town in the whole state, and the only other town that has more density is Brookline. And if you know about Brookline, it's that they have a lot of mid-rise apartment buildings and vast estates. So it's a totally different kind of mixture. The idea here is that addresses the perceived need for affordable housing, but it does it in a way, and it arose out of a reaction to the plan presented by Mr. Newton and the Housing Corporation to put 5-story buildings in the middle of, by right, in the middle of single-family districts, 2-family districts, and so on, which would be totally devastating to those districts. This gives you the solution of providing affordable housing, but at a scale which respects the scale of those districts. It also, unlike other articles you've heard tonight, has particular reference to the protection of the built and natural environment. So it talks about not cutting down mature trees. It talks about not tearing down historic houses and so on. And those are also important aspects to preserving the scale and nature of these neighborhoods in Fowler. Basically, obviously, this refers mostly to 1, 2, and 3 family areas. Now, I didn't provide any detailed proposed votes or slide decks or any of that good stuff because as you can perceive, an article like this requires changes in several different sections of the bylaw, and that requires a level of technical assistance with which I would need some assistance. So I'm not going to speak at great length. I don't know, I probably have a couple minutes left, I don't know. But I was hoping to engage the board in a conversation about this kind of project and what their feelings are and what we can work together to address the affordable housing issue and other issues that have been raised. And other than that, I would be glad to receive any questions or comments you have.
Great, thank you very much. So I will turn it over to Jean first. But I will just first say before we start that I think it's a challenge for us to have a discussion specific to the warrant article hearing without a main motion this evening. I think it's a challenge for us to have a discussion without a main motion.
Well,
But
Madam, if I may, I think it is, I think it is quite clear what is proposed. I say, well, we go to the zone, the charts for the tables for the different zoning districts and add in, affordable housing overlay. Yes, 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 yes. Or we go to whatever, the different things. If that concept is difficult for the board to grasp, I don't believe it is. I think you're smart enough to get it.
it is definitely more nuanced than that. I'll turn it over to Jean.
Thanks. First, my understanding is because this is an overlay district, you would have had to provide certified mail to all of the places you propose to add it to. So it can't get to town meeting without the notice requirement, which is the same reason that the other proposed affordable housing overlay is not getting to town meeting. So with the understanding that neither your warrant article nor the other affordable housing warrant article can get to town meeting because of the failure to meet the notice requirement, I'll just say a couple of observations that I have, Mr. Warden. I really believe this would make it less likely to build affordable housing rather than more likely. And here's why. Right now, you can build housing that's affordable housing anywhere in the town. And you can build larger properties, large enough to be able to run affordable housing in the B districts and in the higher R districts. But you can do that and cut down some mature trees. You can do that and go through the process and the demolition delay and then take down a historic building. This actually will make it less likely to build affordable housing because it puts more impediments in the way of a developer. So now if a developer has a choice, what am I going to do in this B district that I own this property? Oh, I'd like to do affordable housing, but it has all of these other impediments that don't happen regularly. I'd love to sit down with you sometime, Mr. Warden, but it's not going to happen this town meeting for reasons I discussed, and see if we can come up with something, but this isn't it.
If I may just briefly respond,
Jean.
I did speak with the planning director on the notice issue, and she informed me that in her opinion it was not necessary.
Claire, could you confirm that was your conversation, or was it different?
I believe what I said was a change to the use table would not indicate that the noticing would be a requirement, but a proposed overlay and map change would require the notice.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, in terms of, I followed the development of Cambridge's affordable housing overlay quite a lot. And two of the things that, affordable housing is housing that, by its nature cannot pay for itself. And in order to build it, it just doesn't get built. You need the two things that you need are subsidies, and typically the subsidies come with constraints, like LIHTC is low-income housing tax credits are a common one, but you generally need to be building decent-sized apartment buildings, 30 or 40 dwellings, and there isn't funding for smaller scale than that. The other issue that creates a challenge for the builder, for people who are building it, is is the permitting process. And this is one of the things that Cambridge did, rather than having something relying on 40B, their affordable housing overlay is an alternative, and it's basically, a more, it's a less discretionary process. If just simply adding affordable housing overlay to a use table doesn't address either the funding or the clarification behind the permitting process, or frankly, the scope that these buildings need to be in order to get funded and financed. I think an affordable housing proposal has to start with those elements. Thank you.
Thank you. Shana?
I really appreciate your concern for the affordable housing needs of the town and the attempt to craft an aggressive overlay district. I think for the reasons that Jean laid out, this probably would not achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve. I think dimensional requirements in particular would end up being limiting, and given the limitations of going to town meeting this year, I think it's somewhat of a moot point. But if this is of serious interest to you, certainly it's something worth thinking through further. I know it's a goal that many in town share with you.
Thank you, Shana. I agree. I think it's been great to see multiple folks interested in the concept and how to bring forth an affordable housing overlay. I think that there is some space in between where both of these are that is something that is really interesting for the town to consider.
This is the third one.
Absolutely. So, clearly there is a lot of passion and interest, and again, I think putting those all together and being able to find a path forward is clearly something that for 2026, I think deserves some considerable effort in my perspective. Ken?
I agree with the rest of my board members here. I don't think this article is ready to go to town as is. I would support, if you wish to continue this, that we would be willing to work with you to develop something in the future. I think it's a noble cause. I just don't think this is it right now, for the reasons that board members already stated.
May I say one thing in response?
Please.
A clarification.
That would be great.
What I had in mind really was not that somebody would come in, knock down that little house and put up a mega Kearney-style house right out to the edges and cut it up into flats, but the pre-existing large residential buildings that lend themselves to division into some number of smaller units, and there's one right at the start, like the start of Paul Revere Road, a huge house that's on sort of a V-shaped corner, and that was in 1900. That was the most expensive, most highly assessed residential property in town. It was a huge mansion. It used to have a lot of land around it, which obviously is not anymore. But that is divided into a number of decent sized but relatively small apartments, and there are other large houses in the town that might lend themselves. That's really what I was thinking about, not building anew. But
Thank you for the clarification.
Consideration.
Jean, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just going to say the one on Paul Revere Road is condominiums now. It's condominiums, the one on Paul Revere Road. I have a friend who lives in one.
Condominium. Well,
yeah.
Well, it's the same. Same difference.
Still, you'd have to get 17 people to sell. You'd have to get 17 people to sell
Well, I
But
wasn't
the point is, the
not
example is well
suggesting-
taken.
Not
Yes.
suggesting that they would sell their 17,
Right.
there's 17 units in that house?
Yeah.
Wow,
It was
okay.
a helpful example for the scale that you were thinking, so
It was
that's great.
just, that would be maybe an extreme example, but it was just an example that you can take a large house and turn it into a bunch of smaller houses. And that's really what I had in mind.
Great, thank you. So at this time, we'll open up Article 44 for public comment. Anyone wishing to provide comment this evening, please.
Thank you, and I'll make this very brief. Winnell Evans, 20 Orchard Place. I hope that the board will follow through on the offer to work with Mr. Warden on this, because I think one thing that his article does that none of the other proposals that approach affordability do is it takes an aggressive approach that could result in some smaller units, as he was using this example where there would be multiple smaller units in a building, which is what we need for our overlooked senior population. One of the points in our master plan was that we really needed to think about housing for seniors. We have an aging population. We have a population of 1 and 2 person households. And there's just not really a whole lot going on right now for people who want to downsize. When I go for a walk, I get into a lot of spontaneous conversations with strangers. And if they're in their 60s or older, within 20 seconds, we're talking about property taxes, where I'm going to move. I can't downsize in Arlington. So I do hope that you will follow through on this with a focus to smaller units that might be geared towards older people. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes.
Thank you, Carl Wagner, Edge Hill Road. I think Mr. Warden probably has as much experience knowing what's good for our town, knowing what happens in our town, than all of us, perhaps even collectively more than, but he speaks from a place of wisdom and knowledge. And Article 44 was in some ways a response to an article that should be here tonight. That's the real elephant in the room. I think it's called Article 41, the Affordable Housing Overlay. And I think it needs to be said for the record, for ACMi, for the public, that I believe Mr. Revelak is a proponent of that Article 41. So I would ask if his comments could be expunged from the record, or at least that it be known this is the case, and that he not be voting on Mr. Warden's article. Because these are essentially competing visions of how to provide an affordable housing overlay. And, the same thing happened for the MBTA density overlay with the same person. And I think Arlington deserves a clear and transparent process. I don't feel we're getting it. Thank you.
I'll just address that. There are no conflicts of interest that have been identified with any of the preparation for any of the articles for this town meeting. Any other comments this evening? Okay. I'll turn it back over to the board for any other discussion, starting with Ken.
None.
Shayna?
None.
Jean?
No more.
Steve?
Nothing.
Thank you very much. So with that, what I would like to do is see if there is a motion from the board to continue the public hearing for the warrant articles for 2025 annual town meeting to the evening of March 24th.
So motioned.
Second.
We'll take a vote, starting with Steve.
Yes.
Jean.
Yes.
Shayna.
Yes.
Ken.
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. All right, that takes us to our next agenda item, which is new business, and I will turn it over to Director Ricker.
Great, thank you very much. This new business involves the demolition at 821 Massachusetts Avenue of the Atwood House. At our meeting last week, the board meeting last week, the attorney representing the applicant for the project at 821 asked for permission from the board to move forward with demolition of the existing building. The board's approval to demolish the building is condition 5 of the 2009 permit issued for docket 30 through 48, which is the CVS project. The board agreed to vote on their permission to demolish the Atwood House at their meeting on March 24th, 2025, citing concerns about the state of the building site post-demolition activities. However, on Tuesday, March 11th, in an email to me, the building commissioner stated he's ordered immediate demolition of the Atwood House, given that the building has become a serious health and safety risk to the public and that unauthorized entry to the building has continued. He also mentioned to me that police are no longer responding to calls at the building, and that efforts to board up the building have been made consistently with people really just pulling down the boards out of the windows and using the building for antisocial behavior. The building commissioner's order will supersede condition 5 of the 2009 permit. However, as part of the demolition activities, the building basement will be backfilled, which I know is a concern of the board. And Mike Champ and I believe that the board may wish to add conditions to any future permit that may be issued for docket 3798 that address ongoing site maintenance such as grading and grass seeding while waiting for development to occur.
Great, thank you very much for the update. So my understanding and expectation is that we will still have this on our agenda for our meeting next Monday, and that we can address exactly what Director Rickert mentioned with regard to the ongoing site maintenance requirements, given that the building inspector, the Director of ISD has identified that the site does need to be backfilled after the demolition. So any questions or comments? Steve?
None.
Jean?
None.
Shayna?
None.
Ken?
Yeah, is he demolishing the framing and leaving the foundation walls up?
No, I believe it's a complete demo. I'm not positive what's going to happen to the basement, but it will be backfilled.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other new business, Claire?
No, none at this time.
Okay, great. Steve?
I will, I'll defer to next week.
Okay, great. Jean?
So will I.
Okay, Shayna?
None.
And Ken?
Thank you, guys.
Okay, fantastic. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So motioned.
Second.
We'll take a vote, starting with Steve. We did not list any public comment other than that which is in our public hearing this evening.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Fantastic. And we have a second. So we're
did
voting.
that.
Oh,
Yes.
no, okay.
Steve?
Now, yes.
Okay, Jean?
Yes.
Shayna?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. Meeting is adjourned.